In the year 2247, Earth was a world at the crossroads of technological marvel and existential dread. Spacefaring civilizations flourished across the galaxy, but humanity faced an unprecedented threat. The Doomsday virus, a bioweapon engineered during the tumultuous interstellar wars, had re-emerged. Initially thought to be eradicated, it now ravaged the planet, prompting governments and corporations to race against time to find a cure. Dr. Alara Voss stood at the helm of the Global Pathogen Research Institute, a sprawling complex on the outskirts of what was once New London. The city had been reduced to a ghost of its former self, with the constant hum of drones patrolling the skies, ensuring the populace adhered to quarantine measures. The air was thick with tension, and the streets were desolate, save for the occasional flicker of holographic advertisements urging citizens to remain calm and compliant. Alara was a visionary scientist, known for her groundbreaking work in genetic engineering. Her dark hair, pulled back into a tight bun, emphasized the intensity of her sapphire blue eyes. The weight of the world rested on her shoulders, yet she bore it with grace and resolve. As she stood before the massive display screens in the lab, the faces of her team flickered to life, each reflecting the anxiety and determination of their shared mission. Data from the latest samples, her lead virologist, Dr. Kai Lin, announced. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed the stress he was under. The virus has mutated again. It's becoming increasingly resistant to our treatments. Alara sighed, rubbing her temples. How long until we run out of options? Less than a month, Kai replied, the weight of the news hanging heavily in the air. Just then, the lab's doors slid open, and a figure emerged, shrouded in a long, dark coat. It was Riven Thorne, a renowned bioethicist and one of Alara's closest confidants. His sharp features softened slightly as he approached, his green eyes scanning the monitors. Have you considered the implications of this virus beyond just the immediate threat? Riven asked, his voice smooth but urgent. What if we could repurpose it? Alara turned to him, incredulous. Repurpose it? Riven, we're dealing with a potential extinction event. How can you even suggest such a thing? Think about it, he pressed on. The virus is a powerful tool. If we could modify it, we might turn it from a weapon into something beneficial, a method to strengthen human immunity, or even enhance our biological systems. The room fell silent. It was an audacious proposal, one that could either save humanity or spell its doom. Alara's mind raced. The ethical implications were staggering. If they succeeded, they would be heralded as heroes. If they failed, they would be remembered as the architects of humanity's collapse. Let's consider the science first, she said, her voice steadying. If we can find a way to render it harmless, we might be able to use its properties for good. But it has to be safe. As her team brainstormed, ideas flowed like a torrent. They scoured the virus's genetic structure, searching for vulnerabilities, for potential pathways to harness its power. Days turned into nights as they worked tirelessly, each breakthrough followed by a setback. Morale fluctuated, and the weight of the world bore down on them like a black cloud. One evening, after another grueling day, Alara found herself alone in the lab, staring at the glowing strands of the virus displayed on the holographic screen. It flickered in a mesmerizing dance of chaos and structure. Her mind drifted, contemplating Riven's audacious idea. Could they truly manipulate something so destructive into a force for good? With renewed determination, she began to experiment, isolating genetic sequences and testing various combinations. Weeks passed, and the nights blurred into one another. But the tireless pursuit bore fruit after countless trials. They finally achieved a breakthrough. The modified virus was no longer lethal. It could stimulate the immune system without causing harm. Alara and her team gathered to witness the first trial of their creation. The atmosphere was electric, a mix of apprehension and excitement. This is it, she said, standing before her colleagues. If this works, we may just save humanity. The trial was conducted in a controlled environment, with a specially engineered organism that served as a test subject. As the modified virus was introduced, the team watched with bated breath. The screens flashed with data, numbers spiraling in patterns of life and health. Moments stretched into an eternity until finally the reading stabilized. Elara's heart raced as she scanned the data. The immune response was robust and entirely harmless. They had done it. Against all odds, they had rendered the Doomsday virus harmless. Cheers erupted in the lab, a chorus of relief and triumph. Elara felt a wave of emotion wash over her. Tears of joy threatened to spill. They were on the brink of a revolution, not just for humanity, but for life itself. As word spread of their success, the galaxy took notice. News feeds across planets lit up with a story of Earth's triumph over despair. In the halls of the Galactic Council, leaders and scholars debated the implications of this breakthrough, their eyes wide with awe and curiosity. Imagine the possibilities, one senator mused. If humanity can transform a virus, what might they achieve next? Meanwhile, back on Earth, Elara and her team worked diligently to prepare for mass production of the modified virus. They envisioned a world where it could bolster human immunity against countless diseases, a future where the specter of the Doomsday virus was merely a footnote in history. But as they began to scale up production, whispers of skepticism emerged. What if the virus, even in its harmless form, could be weaponized again? What if someone decided to exploit this power? The ethical dilemmas loomed like shadows, threatening to overshadow their hard-won success. Riven sensed the shift in morale and called for an emergency meeting. As the team gathered, the weight of uncertainty settled heavily on their shoulders. "We have created something powerful," Riven began, his voice grave. "But with power comes responsibility. We must ensure this doesn't fall into the wrong hands. Our creation must be protected." Elara nodded, the reality of their situation dawning on her. "We need safeguards, strict protocols to govern its use and distribution. We can't let this become another weapon." As discussions unfolded, the team crafted plans for a multi-layered security framework, ensuring that only authorized personnel could access the modified virus. It was a necessary step, but the inherent risks remained. They were venturing into uncharted territory, and the galaxy watched with bated breath. The moment the first doses of the harmless virus were released into the populace, a wave of hope washed over the planet. In the months that followed, humanity began to heal, and the specter of the Doomsday virus faded into memory. Elara became a symbol of resilience and innovation, celebrated not just on Earth, but across the galaxy. Yet, as the dust settled and the accolades poured in, Elara couldn't shake a lingering unease. The potential for misuse haunted her dreams, a constant reminder of the fragile balance between creation and destruction. The galaxy was indeed in awe of humanity's achievement, but she understood all too well that this was just the beginning. As she gazed out at the stars, she felt a flicker of hope amidst the uncertainty. They had rendered the Doomsday virus harmless, but the true test of their legacy lay ahead. Would humanity rise to the occasion, or would it succumb to its darker instincts? In the vast tapestry of the cosmos, only time would tell. The celebration of humanity's triumph over the Doomsday virus quickly became a double-edged sword. While Earth had stepped back from the brink of destruction, whispers of discontent began to ripple through the interstellar community. Some viewed humanity's success with skepticism, fearing that the very capabilities that saved them could also bring about new threats. Dr. Elara Voss stood in the central auditorium of the Global Pathogen Research Institute, where a holographic map of the galaxy floated before her. Representatives from various civilizations, both allies and skeptics, filled the seats. The atmosphere buzzed with anticipation, each faction eager to understand the implications of Earth's newfound power. "Welcome," Elara began, her voice steady yet laced with tension. "Today, we gather to discuss the recent developments surrounding the modified Doomsday virus and the potential for its responsible use." The audience shifted, eyes glinting with curiosity and apprehension. She took a breath, mentally preparing herself for the questions to come. A tall figure rose from the back of the auditorium. It was Naira, a prominent member of the Xylax Council, a coalition known for its cautious stance on biological advancements. "Dr. Voss," she said, her voice carrying a hint of skepticism, How can we be assured that this virus will remain harmless? What prevents it from being weaponized again? Alara met her gaze, feeling the weight of responsibility. We have established strict protocols and safeguards, ensuring that only authorized personnel can access and modify the virus. It is our goal to foster collaboration and transparency in its use. We're aware of the risks, and we are committed to preventing misuse. But intentions can shift, Naira pressed. In the hands of those who would exploit it, even a harmless virus can become a tool of oppression. Can you guarantee that your safeguards will hold? A murmur rippled through the audience, and Alara could sense the tension building. We can't foresee every outcome, she replied, her voice steady. But our commitment to ethical practices and international oversight is unwavering. We invite the galaxy to help monitor and govern its application. Naira nodded, but her expression remained skeptical. Trust is not easily given. We need more than words. Before Alara could respond, a voice chimed in from the other side of the room. And what of the research itself? A scientist from the Draxan Empire stood, adjusting his glasses. Are there not risks involved in further studies? If the virus has been altered, could there be unforeseen consequences? Alara felt the familiar pang of frustration. We are proceeding with caution, aware of the delicate balance we must maintain. Continued research is vital, but it will be conducted under stringent ethical guidelines and with the cooperation of our interstellar partners. Another voice echoed through the room, this one from the Karen delegate, a species known for their advanced biotechnology. Dr. Voss, the galaxy is in awe of your achievement, but many believe you have awakened a beast. How can you assure us that you won't create an even more dangerous strain? The questions continued, each one a reminder of the delicate line they walked. Alara took a deep breath, centering herself. This is not merely an Earth problem, it is a galactic issue. We seek collaboration, not isolation. Together, we can prevent catastrophe. As the meeting drew to a close, Alara felt the weight of their skepticism lingering in the air. They had accomplished something extraordinary, yet the shadows of doubt loomed large. Trust was a currency in short supply, and without it, their victory felt precarious. Later that evening, Alara and Riven sat in the lab, the glow of monitors casting shadows across their faces. How do we rebuild that trust? Riven asked, his voice low. The galaxy is afraid, and fear can lead to conflict. Eli sighed, rubbing her temples. We need to show them that we are serious about our intentions. We should host a symposium, inviting representatives from across the galaxy to observe our research and governance processes. Riven raised an eyebrow. You think they'll just take our word for it? It's a start, she replied, determination creeping into her voice. We can demonstrate transparency and engage in dialogue. We must foster understanding, not suspicion. As the days passed, preparations for the symposium began in earnest. Alara's team worked tirelessly to compile data, create presentations, and refine their protocols. They knew the stakes were high. This was their chance to prove their commitment to responsible science. When the day finally arrived, the auditorium was filled with representatives from various species and factions. The atmosphere crackled with anticipation and tension. Alara stood at the front, her heart pounding as she welcomed them. Thank you for being here today, she began. We are gathered not just to present our findings, but to foster a dialogue about the future of biological research and the ethical responsibilities that come with it. The presentations showcased their findings, detailing the modification process and the rigorous safety protocols in place. Alara spoke passionately about the potential for the virus to enhance immunity and the importance of collaboration in scientific endeavors. After the presentations, the floor opened for questions. Naira rose once again, her expression contemplative. While your research is impressive, how do you plan to handle the inevitable pushback from factions that oppose your advancements? There will always be those who view your work as a threat. Alara felt the familiar weight settle on her shoulders. We will engage with those communities directly. Open forums, discussions, and educational programs will be key. We cannot expect acceptance without understanding. A representative from the Tharxy Confederation leaned forward, intrigue in her eyes. If your virus is truly harmless, could it be used to combat diseases beyond the scope of your initial research? Could it enhance our biological capacities against threats we haven't yet encountered? Ilara's heart raced at the prospect. Yes, theoretically. If we can ensure its safety, we could explore its application in various fields of medicine, even in enhancing biological resilience against environmental threats. The audience murmured, the idea igniting a spark of hope. Yet, with that hope came more questions. The Karen delegate stood again, skepticism etched on his face. What measures will you put in place to prevent your findings from being weaponized? How will you ensure that other factions cannot misuse your work? Ilara understood that trust would take time, and words alone wouldn't suffice. We are forming an international oversight committee, with representatives from various factions. This committee will govern the research and application of the virus, ensuring that ethical standards are upheld and that no single entity can exploit our work. The discussions continued late into the night, oscillating between skepticism and curiosity. Ilara felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps they were beginning to bridge the gap. But she also understood that change wouldn't happen overnight. As the symposium concluded, Ilara received a message from an anonymous source, warning her of potential dissent among factions. Be vigilant, it read. Not all are pleased with your success. She shared the message with Riven, who frowned. We need to enhance our security measures. If there are those who wish to sabotage our efforts, we can't afford to be complacent. Days turned into weeks, and the team continued to refine their protocols. However, as Ilara delved deeper into her research, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The warnings echoed in her mind, amplifying her sense of foreboding. One evening, while reviewing data in the lab, Ilara noticed an unusual fluctuation in the viral samples. Alarm bells rang in her mind. She pulled up the genetic sequencing, her brow furrowing as she spotted anomalies. Riven, she called, urgency in her voice. He rushed in, his expression shifting from curiosity to concern as he glanced at the screens. What is it? I think we have a problem, she said, pointing to the readings. These sequences show signs of instability. If this continues, it could lead to, I don't know what. Riven's face paled. Could it be a side effect of our modifications, or has someone tampered with our samples? We need to secure the lab and check for any breaches, Ilara replied, her voice steely. If someone is trying to sabotage us, we can't afford to be unprepared. As they worked to secure the facility, Ilara's mind raced. They had come so far, and now the very thing they had created to save humanity could become a source of catastrophe. Trust hung by a thread, and she was determined to protect their hard-earned achievements. The atmosphere in the lab shifted from one of hope to palpable tension. Ilara and her team meticulously examined every piece of equipment, every sample. As they dug deeper, she felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Days turned into a blur of activity, and just as they thought they had contained the situation, a chilling discovery sent shockwaves through the team. One of their own, a junior researcher named Mira, had been siphoning samples under the guise of conducting routine tests. She had been communicating with an unknown faction, seeking to exploit the very virus they had worked to render harmless. Ilara confronted Mira in the lab, her heart heavy with betrayal. Why would you do this? We were working towards something greater. Mira's defiance faltered, her eyes darting between Ilara and Riven. You don't understand. You think you're saving the galaxy, but you're creating a new weapon. I wanted to stop you before it was too late. By betraying us? Riven's voice was filled with disbelief. You don't have to do this. We can find another way. Mira's defiance hung heavy in the air as she stood, arms crossed, a mixture of fear and anger radiating from her. Ilara felt her heart pound, the betrayal cutting deeper than she could have anticipated. Listen to me, Mira, Ilara said, trying to keep her voice calm. We're not creating a weapon. We're trying to save lives. We've worked tirelessly to ensure this virus is safe. You've seen the data. Mira's gaze hardened. Data can be manipulated. I've read enough reports to know that your intentions don't guarantee outcomes. You're risking everything, and I won't let you turn this into another catastrophe. Riven stepped closer, attempting to diffuse the tension. This isn't the way to stop us. You can't sabotage our research based on fear. We're all in this together. If you truly believe there's a danger, help us understand it. But Mira shook her head, her resolve unwavering. You don't get it. I've been approached by a faction that wants to weaponize your findings. They believe your harmless virus can be adapted for warfare, and they're willing to do anything to get it. Alara's stomach dropped at the revelation. Which faction? She demanded, feeling a rush of adrenaline. Who are they? I can't tell you that, Mira replied, voice trembling. They said if I reveal anything, they'll ensure I'm silenced. I thought I could save you by sabotaging the research first. By endangering everything we've built, Alara shot back, her voice rising. You think that's a solution? We need to report this. We need to take action. No, Mira cried, desperation creeping into her tone. If you do that, they'll come for all of us. You don't know who you're dealing with. They're powerful and ruthless. Then we need to strengthen our defenses and alert the authorities, Riven insisted, stepping forward. We can't let fear dictate our actions. Alara felt the weight of the moment. They were standing at the precipice of disaster, and the decisions made here could spell the difference between survival and obliteration. Mira, if you really want to help, then you need to cooperate. We can't protect ourselves unless you tell us everything you know. Mira hesitated, her expression wavering as she looked between them. I don't know if I can trust you anymore. Trust can be rebuilt, Alara urged. We've fought for this, all of us. You don't have to do this alone. After a tense pause, Mira finally relented. They want to know everything about the modified virus. They believe it can be weaponized to target specific genetic markers. If they succeed, they could create a targeted bioweapon, capable of crippling entire populations. Alara's heart raced as she processed the implications. We need to take immediate action, she said firmly. We can't let this happen. Riven, secure the lab and initiate lockdown protocols. We must restrict access to all samples and data until we get a handle on this. Riven nodded, his expression serious. I'll ensure that only essential personnel are allowed in. We'll also initiate communication with our interstellar allies. They need to be aware of the threat. As Riven moved to implement the lockdown, Alara turned back to Mira. We need you to help us understand their plans. If they're watching you, we can't let them know we're on to them. Mira's expression softened, a flicker of remorse crossing her features. I didn't want this. I thought I was protecting everyone. I know, Alara replied, her voice gentler now. But now we have to be proactive. We can't let fear dictate our choices. Hours passed as the lab transformed into a fortress, protocols activated, security measures tightened. The once vibrant atmosphere was now laden with tension, a palpable sense of urgency settling over the team. As they gathered in a secure conference room, Alara addressed her remaining team members. We're facing a grave threat. Mira has informed us that there are factions who wish to exploit our research. We need to strategize how to proceed without drawing unwanted attention. One of the senior scientists, Dr. Owen Hart, raised a hand. Shouldn't we consider going public with this information? If we reveal the threat, we might deter them from acting. That could also put us in danger, Riven interjected. We don't know how far their reach extends. We need to tread carefully. An open declaration could provoke them into action before we're ready. Mira looked visibly shaken, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I've seen their power. They'll retaliate if they think we're onto them. They're capable of anything. Alara considered the possibilities, her mind racing. We need allies, not just within our team, but throughout the galaxy. If we can unite against this threat, we may stand a chance. Dr. Hart nodded. We should reach out to the Galactic Council. They can help us coordinate a response. Alara glanced at Mira. Are you willing to help us contact any of your previous informants? We need as much intel as we can gather. I can try, Mira replied, though her voice wavered with uncertainty. But it's risky. If they find out, we'll have safeguards in place, Alara assured her. We can't operate in fear. We need to take action. As the team strategized, the hours slipped by, their discussions punctuated by the occasional hum of machinery and the distant sound of security alarms. Alara felt the weight of responsibility heavy on her shoulders, but determination surged within her. They had come too far to back down now. Finally, they agreed on a plan. Mira would attempt to reach out to the faction's contacts, using her knowledge to gather information while maintaining a facade of loyalty. Meanwhile, Ilara and Riven would contact trusted allies in the Galactic Council, seeking their guidance and support. As the team disbanded for the night, Ilara lingered behind, staring at the screens that displayed their hard-earned research. The thrill of discovery had turned into a race against time, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The shadows seemed to grow longer, the threat more palpable. Later that night, as Ilara prepared to leave the lab, her calm device buzzed to life. It was Riven, his voice urgent. Ilara, you need to come back. We've got a situation. What happened? She asked, her heart racing. It's Mira. She just received a message she's been compromised. Ilara's stomach dropped. What do you mean? They intercepted her communications. They know she's been in contact with us. Panic surged through her. We have to find her. Where is she? Last seen in the secure wing. I'm on my way there now. Ilara dashed through the halls, her heart pounding in her chest. As she approached the secure wing, she spotted Riven standing by the entrance, his expression grim. She's gone, he said, shaking his head. The door was left ajar, and her terminals still active. Did she leave a trace? Ilara pressed, searching the room for clues. Riven began checking the logs. No sign of a struggle, but the last message she sent was to an unknown source. We need to act fast. Ilara's mind raced. If they've caught on, they might already be moving against us. We have to alert security and initiate a full lockdown. As they worked to secure the lab, an alert blared throughout the facility, a piercing alarm that echoed through the halls. Unauthorized access detected in the secure wing, a mechanical voice announced. Riven, we're out of time, Ilara shouted. We need to get everyone to safety. The two of them rushed to the central command, where they activated emergency protocols. A sense of urgency enveloped them as they locked down all entrances and activated surveillance systems. Are we safe? Riven asked, his eyes darting to the screens displaying various angles of the lab. For now, Ilara replied, though her stomach twisted with uncertainty. But we need to be ready for anything. Moments later, the security feed flickered, and Ilara's heart sank as she saw figures clad in dark uniforms storming through the hallways. They moved with precision, their faces obscured by masks, and Ilara recognized the insignia on their gear, an emblem of the faction Mira had warned them about. Riven, we have intruders, she shouted, adrenaline surging through her veins. We need to fortify our position. On it, Riven replied, rushing to barricade the main entrance as Ilara began frantically assessing their options. We need to alert the authorities. We can't handle this alone. As she activated the emergency comms, a sudden crash echoed through the lab, the door splintering under the force of an explosive charge. Ilara's heart raced as the intruders poured in, their movements swift and calculated. Evacuate, Riven shouted, grabbing Ilara's arm. We need to get to the emergency escape routes. But before they could react, the lead intruder turned, his voice cold and commanding. Dr. Voss, we've come for you. You're coming with us. Ilara felt a chill run down her spine. Who sent you? What do you want? The lead intruder stepped closer, his mask glinting in the harsh lab lights. We want the modified virus, Dr. Voss. Hand it over, and we might let you leave here in one piece. Ilara's mind raced. The gravity of the situation weighed heavily on her. This was no longer just about research, it was a matter of survival. "You think we'll just give it to you?" she shot back, trying to project confidence despite the fear coursing through her veins. Riven positioned himself protectively in front of Alara, his eyes narrowed with determination. "You won't get anything from us," he growled. "We'll fight to protect our work." The lead intruder chuckled, a cold, mirthless sound. "You don't understand the stakes here. The galaxy is changing, and your little experiment is about to become the key to a new era of power. You either cooperate or things will get very messy." Behind them, Alara could hear the thuds of more intruders entering the lab. Time was slipping away, and their options were dwindling. "We need to find a way out," she whispered urgently to Riven. He nodded, his expression fierce. "Let's fall back to the emergency exit. We'll alert security from there." With a quick glance at the intruders, Alara knew they had to move. She and Riven turned, sprinting toward the back of the lab where the emergency exit led to a network of maintenance tunnels. Just as they reached the door, a loud explosion rocked the entrance, sending debris flying. "Now," Riven shouted, kicking the door open and propelling them into the dimly lit tunnel. They raced down the corridor, their footsteps echoing against the cold metal walls. Alara's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. How had Mira's betrayal led to this? How had they underestimated the threat? "We need to find a secure location to regroup," Riven said as they skidded to a halt at a junction. The corridor branched off in several directions, and the faint sounds of chaos echoed behind them. Alara pointed to the left. "That way leads to the storage area. If we can get there, we can barricade ourselves and plan our next move." They dashed down the left corridor, the low hum of the emergency lights casting an eerie glow. As they reached the storage area, Alara quickly pushed the door shut behind them and engaged the locking mechanism. Inside, rows of shelves towered above them, filled with supplies, medical equipment, and containment units. The air was thick with tension, and Alara felt the adrenaline coursing through her. "What do we do now?" she asked, her breath coming in quick bursts. Riven leaned against a nearby shelf, trying to catch his breath. "We need to establish communication with the outside. If we can get a message to the Galactic Council, they'll send reinforcements." Alara nodded, her mind racing. "I'll access the comm station. It should be on the other side of this room." As she moved deeper into the storage area, she spotted a small comms terminal nestled between two large supply containers. She activated it, but the screen flickered with static. "No, no, no," she muttered, frustration mounting. "Not now." "Can you fix it?" Riven asked, peering over her shoulder. "I'll try." Alara focused, her fingers flying over the interface. "Come on, come on." Behind them, a sudden crash made her jump. The intruders were closing in. She could hear their voices, muffled but growing louder. "Search the storage area. They can't have gone far," the lead intruder barked. "We're running out of time," Riven urged, glancing nervously toward the door. "I'm almost there," Alara insisted, her heart racing as she bypassed the static interference. Just as she managed to establish a connection, the door burst open, and a group of masked figures flooded in. "Get down," Riven yelled, shoving Alara aside as he moved to confront the intruders. Alara's heart raced as she ducked behind a shelf, watching Riven face off against the lead intruder. He stood his ground, fists clenched, but the odds were stacked against them. "Enough of this," the lead intruder sneered, raising his weapon. "You're outnumbered. Surrender now, and we'll make this painless." Riven gritted his teeth, ready to fight, but Alara knew they couldn't win this battle. "Riven, we need to retreat," she shouted, her voice breaking through the chaos. In that moment of distraction, the lead intruder seized the opportunity, lunging at Riven. But Riven was quicker, dodging to the side and grappling with the assailant. They struggled, the sounds of fists hitting flesh echoing in the small space. Alara's heart raced as she glanced at the comms terminal. "I can't leave without alerting the council," she thought desperately. Taking a deep breath, she made a decision. "Riven, I'm sending a message," she yelled over the struggle. I need you to hold them off. Just go, Riven grunted, pushing back against the lead intruder. Ilara's fingers flew over the console, drafting a quick but urgent message. This is Dr. Ilara Voss of the Global Pathogen Research Institute. We are under attack from a hostile faction attempting to steal the modified virus. Immediate assistance required. Location, Storage Area B. As she hit send, a loud crash resounded, and the screen flickered, momentarily displaying their position. Ilara's heart sank as she realized how easily the intruders could trace them now. Riven, she shouted, fear coursing through her. We have to move. With a final push, Riven managed to throw the lead intruder off balance, but more assailants were pouring into the storage area. This way, he yelled, pointing toward a narrow exit at the back of the room. They sprinted toward the exit, narrowly avoiding a barrage of fire from the intruders. Ilara felt the heat of the shots whizzing past her as they dove through the door and into a dimly lit maintenance corridor. Which way? Riven asked, panting heavily. Left, Ilara pointed. It leads to the emergency stairs. We can get to the upper levels and find a secure place to hide. As they ran, Ilara's mind raced. She had to think ahead. If we can make it to the rooftop, we can signal for help. The drones should be monitoring the area. They burst into the emergency stairwell, the harsh fluorescent lights flickering overhead. As they climbed the stairs, Ilara could hear the distant sounds of alarms and chaos echoing through the facility. Keep going, Riven urged, determination etched on his face. We're almost there. They reached the rooftop access door, and Ilara flung it open, stepping onto the cold metal surface. The wind whipped around them, a stark contrast to the chaos inside. Ilara hurried to the edge of the rooftop, scanning the horizon for any sign of help. We need to find a way to signal the drones, she said, desperation creeping into her voice. If they can see us, they can send a response team. Riven pulled out a small emergency beacon from his pack. This should do the trick, he said, activating it. A bright light burst forth, flashing in a coded pattern. Let's hope they see it, Ilara said, her heart pounding in her chest. They both turned to the door, listening for the sounds of pursuit. But the moment of relief was short-lived. The door swung open, and the lead intruder stepped onto the rooftop, flanked by two others. Did you really think you could escape? He taunted, raising his weapon again. This is the end of the line for you. Run, Riven shouted, shoving Ilara toward the edge. Ilara stumbled but regained her footing. We can't let them take us. We have to fight. No, Riven snapped, grabbing her arm. We'll have our chance. Right now, survival is the priority. In that instant, a loud whirring sound filled the air. Ilara turned to see a fleet of drones approaching, their lights flashing as they swooped in. Over here, she yelled, waving her arms. The lead intruder's expression darkened. Get them, he barked, lunging forward. But before he could reach them, the drones unleashed a volley of non-lethal projectiles, stunning the intruders and sending them sprawling to the ground. Ilara felt a rush of hope as the drones circled them, their scanners locking onto the situation. We're saved, she exclaimed, relief washing over her. Riven smiled, though he was clearly exhausted. We did it. We held on long enough. The drones hovered closer, deploying a holographic interface. Dr. Ilara Voss, your distress signal has been received. We are here to extract you and provide assistance. Please prepare for transport. Ilara nodded, feeling the weight of the world lift from her shoulders. Thank you. We need to secure the lab and apprehend those intruders. Understood, the drone replied. Extraction sequence initiated. Please stand by. As the drones prepared for their extraction, Ilara and Riven exchanged a glance, both feeling the gravity of what they had just endured. The drones shimmered in the cold night air, their lights light the rooftop as Ilara and Riven stood ready for extraction. Ilara took a deep breath, trying to process the whirlwind of events that had led them here. The chaos, the betrayal, it all felt surreal, like a nightmare from which she couldn't wake. "Are you all right?" Riven asked, concern etched on his face as he studied her. "I will be," she replied, forcing a smile despite the heaviness in her chest. "We just need to get through this. We need to regroup and figure out our next move." The lead drone's voice cut through her thoughts. "Extraction in T-10 seconds. Please prepare for teleportation." Ilara glanced back at the intruders, who were still writhing on the ground from the drone's stun blasts. "What about them?" she asked. "They'll regroup. We can't leave them here to come after us again." The drone's lights flickered as it processed her request. "Local security forces have been alerted and are en route. Engaging teleportation now." In an instant, a warm light enveloped Ilara and Riven, and they felt the familiar sensation of being pulled through space. The rooftop and the chaos faded into a blur, replaced by a sudden, jarring stillness. They materialized in a secure command center, the hum of machinery surrounding them. Ilara squinted against the bright lights, momentarily disoriented. "Welcome back," said Commander Garen, a stern figure with a reputation for his no-nonsense approach. He stood with arms crossed, eyeing them both critically. "What the hell happened up there?" "We were attacked by a faction trying to steal our research," Ilara explained, still catching her breath. "Mira warned us about them, but we couldn't act fast enough. They knew about the modified virus and were ready to take it by force." Garen's brow furrowed, the lines on his face deepening. "Did you secure the virus? Do you have it here?" Ilara shook her head. "We need to get back to the lab. They might still have access to our research. They could even be working with someone on the inside." Riven stepped forward, the weight of the situation evident on his face. "We can't let them know we're on to them. If they realize we survived, they'll adapt their strategy. We need to go on the offensive." Garen nodded, his expression shifting from concern to determination. "We'll need a full assessment of the situation. Get me all available intel on the faction that attacked you. I want a list of known associates and any potential threats." Ilara's mind raced as she considered their options. "If we can track their communications, we might find out who's orchestrating this from the shadows." "Good thinking," Garen replied. "We'll use our resources to dig deeper. In the meantime, I want you both to rest and regroup. You've been through a lot." As they moved to a small lounge area, Ilara felt the weight of exhaustion settle over her. Riven sat beside her, his face weary but resolute. "I can't believe we made it out," he said, his voice low. "But this isn't over. They'll come back for us." "I know," Ilara replied, staring out the window at the distant lights of the city. "We need to prepare for whatever comes next." Riven leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "We also need to find Mira. She put us in danger, but she might still have useful information. If we can convince her to come back, she could help us understand what we're up against." "Or she could be a liability," Ilara countered. "If they caught her, she could be compromised. We have to consider the risks." "We can't afford to act on assumptions," Riven insisted, determination flaring in his eyes. "We need facts. We need to find her." Before Ilara could respond, the comm system crackled to life. "Dr. Voss, Riven, we have a situation." Garen's voice came through. "Urgent. You need to see this." They hurried back to the command center, where a large holographic display showed a live feed of the lab's exterior. Security footage revealed the remaining intruders regrouping, their movements swift and purposeful. "They're preparing for another assault," Garen said, frustration evident in his tone. "We have to get our people to safety." Ilara felt a surge of adrenaline. "If they're outside, we need to know how many there are. We can't afford to underestimate them again." Riven stepped closer to the display. "I can tap into the lab's internal security systems and get us a layout of their movements." "Do it," Garen commanded, "and make it quick." As Riven worked at a console, Ilara's mind raced. They were facing a formidable enemy, one that had shown they wouldn't hesitate to use violence to achieve their goals. She felt the pressure of their research weighing heavily on her. What if they succeeded in stealing the virus? The consequences could be catastrophic. "Here we go," Riven said, glancing up from the screen. "I've got visual access to the security cameras. They're moving in teams, but it looks like they're still trying to regroup from the earlier chaos." Alara studied the feed, her heart pounding as she recognized familiar faces among the intruders. "Those are our former colleagues," she breathed. "People we worked with for years. How could they be involved?" "It's possible they've been coerced or manipulated," Riven suggested. "Or maybe they've always been aligned with this faction and we didn't realize it." Garen's voice broke through their thoughts. "We need to get a secure team in there and assess the situation. I want you both to help coordinate the operation. We can't allow them to breach the lab again." Alara nodded, determination flooding her veins. "Let's prepare. We need to protect our research and our people." As they strategized, Alara's thoughts returned to Mira. The tangled web of betrayal and loyalty felt heavier than ever. They needed to find a way to turn this situation around, not just for their own safety, but for the future of their research. "Riven," she said, her voice low, "what if we can use this to our advantage? If we can figure out where they're holed up, we can track down Mira. Maybe we can turn her back to our side." Riven's eyes lit up with understanding. "If we can create a diversion, we might be able to lure them out and gather intel. We need to act fast." With Garen's approval, they quickly laid out a plan. Using the security feeds, they identified weak points in the intruders' formation. Alara suggested creating a controlled blackout in specific areas to confuse them and force their hand. "Once they're distracted, we can move in and gather intel," Riven said. "And if we can find Mira, we can turn this around." As they prepared for the operation, Alara felt a mix of fear and hope. This could be their chance to reclaim control, but the risks were immense. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were still walking into a trap. "We need to be smart about this," Alara reminded Riven as they gathered supplies. "If they're anticipating our moves, we could be walking right into danger." "I know," Riven replied, determination flickering in his eyes. "But we have to try. We can't let fear dictate our actions." They moved quickly, gathering equipment and coordinating with a security team. The atmosphere was charged with urgency, everyone aware of the stakes. As they headed toward the lab, Alara felt a sense of purpose building within her. They had faced down the enemy once. They could do it again. When they reached the lab, Garen addressed the assembled security personnel. "Listen up. We're facing a well-organized faction that's determined to seize our research. We need to stay sharp and focused. Follow Dr. Voss and Riven's lead. They know the layout better than anyone." Alara nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. "We'll create a distraction in the East Wing. When they move to investigate, we'll slip in and gather intel. Our priority is to locate Mira." As the team split up, Alara and Riven positioned themselves near the East Wing's entrance, ready to set their plan in motion. "This is it," Alara whispered, her heart racing. "We need to stay alert." Riven glanced at her, determination shining in his eyes. "We'll get through this. Just stay close." The seconds felt like hours as they waited, tension hanging thick in the air. Suddenly, the sounds of commotion echoed from the opposite side of the lab. Alarms blared, and the lights flickered as the controlled blackout took effect. "Now," Alara shouted, leading the charge into the darkened hallway. They sprinted through the shadows, navigating familiar terrain with instinctual ease. As they reached the central lab area, Ilara's heart raced. The dim light from emergency panels lit their surroundings, casting eerie shadows. "Look!" Riven pointed toward a figure in the distance. "It's Mira." Alara squinted, her breath catching as she recognized her former colleague. Mira stood near a terminal, frantically typing. Ilara's heart surged with a mix of relief and apprehension. "Mira," she called out, moving forward. "We're here to help." The drones shimmered in the cold night air, their lights lit the rooftop as Alara and Riven stood ready for extraction. Alara took a deep breath, trying to process the whirlwind of events that had led them here. The chaos, the betrayal, it all felt surreal, like a nightmare from which she couldn't wake. "Are you all right?" Riven asked, concern etched on his face as he studied her. "I will be," she replied, forcing a smile despite the heaviness in her chest. "We just need to get through this. We need to regroup and figure out our next move." The lead drone's voice cut through her thoughts. "Extraction in T-10 seconds. Please prepare for teleportation." Alara glanced back at the intruders, who were still writhing on the ground from the drone's stun blasts. "What about them?" she asked. "They'll regroup. We can't leave them here to come after us again." The drone's lights flickered as it processed her request. "Local security forces have been alerted and are en route. Engaging teleportation now." In an instant, a warm light enveloped Alara and Riven, and they felt the familiar sensation of being pulled through space. The rooftop and the chaos faded into a blur, replaced by a sudden, jarring stillness. They materialized in a secure command center, the hum of machinery surrounding them. Alara squinted against the bright lights, momentarily disoriented. "Welcome back," said Commander Garen, a stern figure with a reputation for his no-nonsense approach. He stood with arms crossed, eyeing them both critically. "What the hell happened up there?" "We were attacked by a faction trying to steal our research," Alara explained, still catching her breath. "Mira warned us about them, but we couldn't act fast enough. They knew about the modified virus and were ready to take it by force." Garen's brow furrowed, the lines on his face deepening. "Did you secure the virus? Do you have it here?" Alara shook her head. "We need to get back to the lab. They might still have access to our research. They could even be working with someone on the inside." Riven stepped forward, the weight of the situation evident on his face. "We can't let them know we're onto them. If they realize we survived, they'll adapt their strategy. We need to go on the offensive." Garen nodded, his expression shifting from concern to determination. "We'll need a full assessment of the situation. Get me all available intel on the faction that attacked you. I want a list of known associates and any potential threats." Alara's mind raced as she considered their options. "If we can track their communications, we might find out who's orchestrating this from the shadows." "Good thinking," Garen replied. "We'll use our resources to dig deeper. In the meantime, I want you both to rest and regroup. You've been through a lot." As they moved to a small lounge area, Alara felt the weight of exhaustion settle over her. Riven sat beside her, his face weary but resolute. "I can't believe we made it out," he said, his voice low. "But this isn't over. They'll come back for us." "I know," Alara replied, staring out the window at the distant lights of the city. "We need to prepare for whatever comes next." Riven leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "We also need to find Mira. She put us in danger, but she might still have useful information. If we can convince her to come back, she could help us understand what we're up against." "Or she could be a liability," Alara countered. "If they caught her, she could be compromised. We have to consider the risks." "We can't afford to act on assumptions," Riven insisted, determination flaring in his eyes. "We need facts. We need to find her." Before Alara could respond, the comm system crackled to life. "Dr. Voss, Riven, we have a situation." Garen's voice came through, urgent. "You need to see this." They hurried back to the command center, where a large holographic display showed a live feed of the lab's exterior. Security footage revealed the remaining intruders regrouping, their movements swift and purposeful. "They're preparing for another assault," Garen said, frustration evident in his tone. "We have to get our people to safety." Alara felt a surge of adrenaline. "If they're outside, we need to know how many there are. We can't afford to underestimate them again." Riven stepped closer to the display. "I can tap into the lab's internal security systems and get us a layout of their movements." "Do it," Garen commanded, "and make it quick." As Riven worked at a console, Alara's mind raced. They were facing a formidable enemy, one that had shown they wouldn't hesitate to use violence to achieve their goals. She felt the pressure of their research weighing heavily on her, What if they succeeded in stealing the virus? The consequences could be catastrophic. "Here we go," Riven said, glancing up from the screen. "I've got visual access to the security cameras. They're moving in teams, but it looks like they're still trying to regroup from the earlier chaos." Ilara studied the feed, her heart pounding as she recognized familiar faces among the intruders. "Those are our former colleagues," she breathed. "People we worked with for years. How could they be involved?" "It's possible they've been coerced or manipulated," Riven suggested. "Or maybe they've always been aligned with this faction and we didn't realize it." Garen's voice broke through their thoughts. "We need to get a secure team in there and assess the situation. I want you both to help coordinate the operation. We can't allow them to breach the lab again." Ilara nodded, determination flooding her veins. "Let's prepare. We need to protect our research and our people." As they strategized, Ilara's thoughts returned to Mira. The tangled web of betrayal and loyalty felt heavier than ever. They needed to find a way to turn this situation around, not just for their own safety, but for the future of their research. "Riven," she said, her voice low, "what if we can use this to our advantage? If we can figure out where they're holed up, we can track down Mira. Maybe we can turn her back to our side." Riven's eyes lit up with understanding. "If we can create a diversion, we might be able to lure them out and gather intel. We need to act fast." With Garen's approval, they quickly laid out a plan. Using the security feeds, they identified weak points in the intruders' formation. Ilara suggested creating a controlled blackout in specific areas to confuse them and force their hand. "Once they're distracted, we can move in and gather intel," Riven said. "And if we can find Mira, we can turn this around." As they prepared for the operation, Ilara felt a mix of fear and hope. This could be their chance to reclaim control, but the risks were immense. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were still walking into a trap. "We need to be smart about this," Ilara reminded Riven as they gathered supplies. "If they're anticipating our moves, we could be walking right into danger." "I know," Riven replied, determination flickering in his eyes. "But we have to try. We can't let fear dictate our actions." They moved quickly, gathering equipment and coordinating with a security team. The atmosphere was charged with urgency, everyone aware of the stakes. As they headed toward the lab, Ilara felt a sense of purpose building within her. They had faced down the enemy once, they could do it again. When they reached the lab, Garen addressed the assembled security personnel. "Listen up. We're facing a well-organized faction that's determined to seize our research. We need to stay sharp and focused. Follow Dr. Voss and Riven's lead. They know the layout better than anyone." Ilara nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. "We'll create a distraction in the East Wing. When they move to investigate, we'll slip in and gather intel. Our priority is to locate Mira." As the team split up, Ilara and Riven positioned themselves near the East Wing's entrance, ready to set their plan in motion. "This is it," Ilara whispered, her heart racing. "We need to stay alert." Riven glanced at her, determination shining in his eyes. "We'll get through this. Just stay close." The seconds felt like hours as they waited, tension hanging thick in the air. Suddenly, the sounds of commotion echoed from the opposite side of the lab. Alarms blared, and the lights flickered as the controlled blackout took effect. "Now!" Ilara shouted, leading the charge into the darkened hallway. They sprinted through the shadows, navigating familiar terrain with instinctual ease. As they reached the central lab area, Ilara's heart raced. The dim light from emergency panels lit their surroundings, casting eerie shadows. "Look!" Riven pointed toward a figure in the distance. "It's Mira." Ilara squinted, her breath catching as she recognized her former colleague. Mira stood near a terminal, frantically typing. Ilara's heart surged with a mix of relief and apprehension. "Mira," she called out, moving forward. "We're here to help." "Mira. 4 Omini. You said?" "Next chapter 2,000 words." Chatty said. Chat. Harmless virus. Chapter 6, Crossroads. Mira, Ilara called again, her voice echoing through the dimly lit lab. It's us, Ilara and Riven. Mira turned, her expression shifting from intense focus to surprise, then wariness. What are you doing here? You shouldn't be. We came to help you, Riven replied, glancing around nervously. The lab is under attack. We need to get out before they realize we're here. Mira's eyes narrowed, skepticism clouding her features. Help? After everything that's happened, you really think I can trust you? Mira, this isn't the time for grudges, Ilara urged, stepping closer. We're all in danger. You know that better than anyone. They're after the virus, and they'll do anything to get it. Mira hesitated, glancing at the terminal where she'd been working. I've got something, she said finally, but it's not what you think. I was trying to decode their communications. Then let us help, Ilara insisted. We can figure out a way to stop them together. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Mira's face, and Ilara seized the moment. We don't have much time. The intruders are regrouping, and they'll be back. If you have any information, we need it now. After a tense moment, Mira stepped back and gestured toward the terminal. Fine. But if you try anything, she trailed off, her eyes searching theirs for sincerity. We're on the same side, Riven said firmly, moving to stand beside Ilara. Let's just focus on getting through this. Mira turned back to the terminal, her fingers flying over the keys. I intercepted some communications before the attack. They're planning a larger strike on the facility tonight. Ilara's stomach dropped. How do you know? What did they say? There's a mole in our ranks, Mira replied, her voice steady but strained. Someone's feeding them intel about our research and security protocols. I've been trying to identify who it is. Riven exchanged a look with Ilara, the weight of Mira's revelation sinking in. So, not only are we dealing with external threats, but there's someone on the inside working against us, he said, his voice low. Mira nodded grimly. Exactly. They've been monitoring us for weeks, waiting for the right moment to strike. Do you have any leads? Ilara pressed. Anyone who seems suspicious? I can't be sure, Mira replied, shaking her head. But I've noted some odd communications and movements among the staff. It's like they were expecting this. Ilara felt her frustration boiling. We can't let them get away with this. We need to find out who it is and stop them before it's too late. Agreed, Riven said, stepping closer to Mira. But first, we need to secure this area and protect the data you've gathered. If they know you're here, they'll come for you. Mira hesitated again, but something shifted in her expression. All right, but we need to act fast. If they're planning an assault, they won't wait long. As Mira pulled up the data on the terminal, Ilara felt a surge of urgency. They needed a plan, and they needed it now. Let's set up defenses around this area. If they're coming for you, we can trap them. Mira nodded, her focus sharpening. There are security measures we can activate to lock down the lab, but we'll need to reach the control panel in the main corridor. Riven looked at Ilara, determination radiating from him. I can go with her. We'll get the lockdown initiated while you keep an eye on this terminal. Be careful, Ilara warned, her heart racing at the thought of being separated. If anything goes wrong, we regroup here. Got it, Riven replied, and with that, he and Mira moved quickly toward the exit. Ilara watched them go, her mind racing with the implications of their situation. She couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability that settled over her. If they were exposed, the enemy would strike without hesitation. Moments later, the room fell into an uneasy silence, punctuated only by the sound of Mira's fingers tapping against the terminal. Ilara glanced at the security feeds displayed on the adjacent screen, her heart racing as she saw flickering shadows moving outside the lab. They were already closing in. A flicker of movement caught her eye, and she leaned closer to the screen. Come on, she muttered, trying to maintain focus. Suddenly, the terminal beeped, and Mira's voice cut through the tension. I've got the lockdown protocol up. We need to hurry before they get in here. Alara felt a surge of hope. Good, let's do this. Mira swiftly navigated through the interface, entering codes and commands with precision. Just a few more seconds. Outside the lab, the shadows grew more pronounced, and the sounds of footsteps echoed closer. Alara's heart raced as she peered through the glass panel, anxiety flooding her senses. Almost there, Mira called out, her eyes fixed on the screen. Alara turned back, ready to assist, when the door to the lab suddenly slammed open, and a group of masked intruders flooded into the room. "Mira!" Alara shouted, instinctively moving to shield her. "Get down!" Chaos erupted as Riven, who had just entered behind the intruders, lunged forward, but it was too late. The lead assailant pointed a weapon at them, his voice cold. "Step away from the terminal. Now." "Don't do it, Mira!" Alara yelled, her heart pounding. "We can fight this." But Mira, caught between her loyalty to Alara and the fear in the intruder's eyes, hesitated. The moment stretched painfully, and Alara felt a deep sense of betrayal mingling with her fear. "Now," the lead intruder commanded, and Mira's fingers froze over the terminal. "Mira!" Riven shouted, rushing forward. "Don't let them take it." I can't," Mira stammered, tears of fear glistening in her eyes. "They'll kill us." "Do what they say," Alara urged, desperation clawing at her throat. "We'll find another way." But just as Mira began to comply, an explosion echoed from the corridor outside, shaking the walls. The intruders momentarily faltered, confusion flaring in their eyes. "Security breach," one of the assailants yelled. "We need to regroup." Alara seized the moment. "Mira, now, activate the lockdown." Mira's hands flew over the terminal once more. "I'm trying. I just need a second." The lead intruder snarled, regaining his composure. "Get her away from that terminal." In a split-second decision, Riven lunged, grabbing Mira and pulling her behind him. "Go," he shouted to Alara. "Lock the door." Alara rushed to the door control panel, her fingers trembling as she punched in the lockdown code. The door slid shut, sealing them inside, but she could still hear the chaos outside. "Did you do it?" Riven asked, glancing at the terminal. "Did you lock them out?" "Not yet," Mira said, her voice strained. "They're trying to breach the door. I need more time." The lead intruder began pounding on the door, shouting orders to his team. "Get that door open. We can't let them secure the terminal." "Mira, keep working," Alara urged, panic rising as she glanced at the security feeds again. "They're not far from getting in." Mira's fingers moved frantically over the screen, and Alara felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her. They were running out of time, and if the intruders got inside, everything would be lost. Come on," Mira muttered, sweat beading on her forehead. Just as the door shuddered under another blow, the screen flashed green, and a loud beep echoed through the room. "Lockdown initiated," Mira exclaimed, a mixture of relief and fear in her voice. "Great. Now we need to barricade the door," Riven said, moving toward a nearby shelving unit. Alara joined him, and together they pushed the heavy unit against the door just as another impact shook the frame. "We can't let them through," Alara shouted. "We need to secure the terminal," Riven said, glancing at Mira. "Can you hold the door?" "I'll do my best," Mira replied, her voice strained as she focused on the terminal. "I can keep monitoring their movements and see if I can find a way to counter their attack." Alara felt a surge of determination. "Then let's fortify our position. We need to be ready for whatever comes next." As they barricaded the door, Alara felt a sense of purpose returning. They had faced danger before, and this time would be no different. They had the knowledge, the skills, and each other. "Mira," Alara said as they worked, "do you think you can find out who's behind this? The mole?" "I'll try," Mira replied, her focus unwavering. "But we need time. I might need to access the mainframe from another terminal." The door rattled violently as the intruders outside grew more desperate, their shouts mingling with the sound of heavy objects being thrown against the barricade. Ilara's heart raced as she pushed against the shelving unit, feeling the cold sweat trickle down her back. "Stay focused, Mira," she said, glancing back at the terminal where Mira was still working, her fingers dancing over the keys with frantic precision. "We need every second you can give us." "I'm trying to isolate the communications," Mira replied, her eyes fixed on the screen. "If I can identify the mole, we might be able to turn the tide." Riven stood by the door, his muscles taut as he braced against the barricade. "I can hear them strategizing out there," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "They're trying to breach the lockdown. We need to prepare for an assault." Ilara nodded, adrenaline coursing through her veins. "What's the plan if they get through?" "We hold our ground," Riven replied. "We can't let them access the terminal. If they do, everything we've worked for could be compromised." The sound of footsteps echoed closer, and Ilara felt her stomach twist with fear. "We need to make sure they don't breach this room. Mira, is there any way you can set up additional defenses?" Mira looked up, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I might be able to reroute some of the lab's automated defenses to this area. If I can get the security drones activated, they could help us." "Do it," Ilara urged, watching the screens for any signs of movement outside. "We need every advantage we can get." As Mira worked, Ilara turned to Riven. "We have to trust her. If she can get those drones working, it might buy us the time we need." Riven nodded, his eyes scanning the door, alert for any signs of intrusion. "And if it doesn't, we need to be ready to fight." Just then, a loud crash reverberated through the room as the intruders attempted to break down the door. The barricade shuddered, and Ilara felt her heart leap into her throat. "Stay strong," she whispered, gripping the edge of the table as if it would ground her. "We can't give up." Moments stretched into an eternity as Mira continued to type, her concentration unwavering. Ilara's breath came in quick bursts, each sound outside intensifying her anxiety. Suddenly, the terminal beeped again, and Mira looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. "I've accessed the security network, activating the drones now." As she pressed a series of buttons, the room filled with a low hum, and Ilara felt a rush of relief. "We've got backup," she said, glancing at Riven. "This might turn the tide." But the intruders were relentless. They continued to pound on the door, and Ilara braced herself for the inevitable confrontation. "Get ready," Riven shouted, preparing to move into a defensive position. The door burst open, and the lead intruder lunged forward, weapon drawn. Just as he entered, several security drones whirred to life, flying into the room with a series of blaring alarms. "Stop," the intruder shouted, but the drones were already deploying non-lethal stuns, firing beams of bright light at the attackers. Ilara took a deep breath and leapt forward. "Riven, cover me." She moved toward the lead intruder, determined to disarm him before he could retaliate. The drones engaged the intruders, the chaos erupting into a cacophony of shouts and bright flashes of light. Ilara felt the energy of the fight pulse around her, fueling her determination. She had to protect their research, no matter the cost. "Get back," Riven shouted as he tackled one of the assailants to the ground, the two grappling for control. Ilara reached the lead intruder, who was momentarily distracted by the chaos around him. She seized the opportunity and struck, delivering a swift kick to his weapon. It clattered to the ground as he stumbled back. "Hands up," she shouted, adrenaline surging through her. The intruder glared at her, eyes filled with rage. "You think you can stop us? We're just getting started." Mira's voice broke through the chaos. "I've isolated their communications. I can hear what they're planning." "Keep talking," Ilara yelled back, her focus divided between the fight and Mira's updates. "They're regrouping outside, trying to breach the lab," Mira continued, her voice steady despite the tension. "They have reinforcements on the way. We need to end this fast." The lead intruder recovered and lunged at Ilara, but she sidestepped him, grabbing a nearby lab stool and swinging it at him. It connected with a satisfying thud, sending him crashing to the ground. "Don't let them in," Riven shouted, struggling with another intruder who was trying to flank them. Alara felt a rush of determination. We can't let them take the terminal. The drones continued to buzz around the room, stunning intruders and forcing them back. The security systems were doing their job, but the sheer number of attackers was overwhelming. Mira, any chance you can access the building's alarm system? Alara asked, dodging another incoming assailant. I'm on it, Mira replied, fingers flying over the keys. If I can trigger a lockdown throughout the entire facility, it might buy us some time. Do it, Riven yelled, finally gaining the upper hand and throwing his opponent against the wall. With renewed focus, Alara continued to fend off attackers, her movements fluid and precise. She felt the adrenaline coursing through her veins, fueling her resolve. They had to protect the research and each other. The sound of alarms blaring filled the air as Mira's fingers worked furiously. I've got it, locking down the entire facility now. Suddenly, the lights dimmed, and the alarm system blared a deafening sound. A mechanical voice echoed through the lab. Attention, lockdown in progress. All personnel must evacuate to designated safe zones. Alara glanced at Mira, a sense of hope igniting within her. You did it. Now let's hold this position. But just as they felt the tide turning, the lead intruder, who had regained his footing, shouted an order to his team. Regroup, we need to breach the terminal, push forward. More intruders poured into the lab, and the pressure intensified. Alara felt her heart race as she realized they were outnumbered, the odds shifting against them once more. Riven, she shouted, desperation clawing at her throat. We need to hold them off. I'm trying, he yelled back, his face a mask of concentration. But they're relentless. Alara looked around, searching for anything they could use to their advantage. A heavy piece of lab equipment caught her eye, an old robotic arm used for experiments. It was bulky, but could provide a temporary barrier. Riven, help me with that, she shouted, pointing to the robotic arm. He nodded, determination fueling his movements. Together, they hurried to the equipment and dragged it into position, using it as a makeshift barricade. The intruders were closing in, but the drones were still providing cover, zipping around and firing stunning beams at the attackers. Alara felt a surge of gratitude for the technology they had built. Mira, are you still with us? She called out, breathless. Just about done, Mira replied, sweat dripping down her forehead. I'm almost through. The lead intruder bellowed in frustration. Push through. We need that terminal. Alara glanced at Riven, their eyes meeting in a moment of unspoken understanding. They had to hold their ground until Mira finished her work. As the intruders surged forward, Alara took a deep breath, steeling herself for the fight ahead. We can do this, she shouted, raising her voice to rally everyone. For the lab, for the research. Riven nodded, determination etched on his face. Together. With renewed strength, they stood their ground as the intruders charged. Alara swung the robotic arm, catching one of the assailants off guard, while Riven used a nearby piece of equipment as a shield, blocking incoming attacks. The drones continued to buzz around them, stunning attackers and providing vital support. The room felt electric with tension, each moment stretching into eternity. Finally, Mira's voice rang out, full of triumph. I've accessed the mainframe, locking down all access points and cutting communications. The lights flickered, and a new wave of urgency washed over the intruders as they realized their plans were unraveling. Fall back, one shouted, his voice laced with panic. Regroup outside. Don't let them escape, Alara yelled, pushing forward with Riven at her side. We can't let them get away. But the tide had turned. The remaining intruders were retreating, scrambling back toward the door as the drones continued to engage them. Mira, keep an eye on the feeds, Riven shouted as they pressed their advantage. Make sure they don't regroup. Alara felt the adrenaline still coursing through her as they pushed forward, determined to end this confrontation once and for all. We have to secure the area. They won't stop until they get what they want. The chaotic energy of the lab slowly began to settle, the last of the intruders fleeing in a disorganized retreat. Alara and Riven stood back to back, breathing heavily as the drones continued their patrol, ensuring no one lingered in the vicinity. "Are we safe?" Alara asked, her heart still racing as she scanned the room for any signs of lingering threats. "For now," Riven replied, wiping sweat from his brow. "But we can't let our guard down. They'll be back." Mira, still at the terminal, turned to them, her face pale but determined. "I've locked down access points, but they may have backup nearby. We need to move quickly to a more secure location." Alara nodded, her thoughts racing. "What about the research? We can't leave it here unprotected." "I can transfer the critical data to a secure drive," Mira said, her fingers already moving across the keyboard. "It'll only take a few minutes." "Make it fast," Riven urged, looking toward the door. "We have to get out before they regroup." As Mira worked, Alara took a moment to collect her thoughts. The confrontation had shaken her, but they had survived. They had to keep moving forward. "We need a plan for when we get out of here," she said, glancing at Riven. "Agreed," he replied, his voice steady. "We can't go back to our quarters. We'll have to find a safe space, maybe the storage room on the west side of the building." Mira looked up, a frown creasing her brow. "What if the mole is there? We don't know who to trust." "Then we keep our eyes open," Alara said, her resolve hardening. "We'll stick together and figure it out." Just then, the terminal beeped, and Mira turned back to the screen. "Almost done, just a few more files to transfer." The tension in the room mounted as they waited, Alara's heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. That danger lurked just beyond the door. "I've got it," Mira exclaimed, her voice cutting through the air. "Data transferred to the secure drive. Let's go." Riven moved to the door, peering through the small window. "All clear for now," he said, motioning for them to follow. "Let's move." They slipped out of the lab, the corridor eerily quiet. The alarms had fallen silent, leaving a heavy stillness that felt unnerving. Alara kept close to Riven, her senses on high alert as they navigated the maze of hallways. "Stick to the plan," Riven reminded them as they turned a corner. "We'll head to the storage room and lock the door behind us." They reached the storage room, and Riven pushed the door open, scanning the small space before stepping inside. Alara followed closely, with Mira bringing up the rear. Once inside, Riven quickly shut and locked the door. "Now what?" Mira asked, her voice low as she set the secure drive on a nearby table. Alara took a deep breath, trying to regain her composure. "We need to figure out who the mole is. If they've been feeding information to the intruders, we can't trust anyone in the facility." Riven nodded, crossing his arms. "We should go through the data Mira collected and see if there are any clues. Any patterns in communication could lead us to the mole." "Right," Mira said, her expression serious. "I'll need a few minutes to analyze the logs." As Mira worked, Alara paced the small room, her thoughts racing. "What if we're wrong about the mole? What if it's someone we trust?" "We'll deal with that if it comes to it," Riven replied. "Right now, we need answers." Mira's fingers flew over the secure drive as she pulled up the logs. "There are a lot of communications here, but I can filter them by frequency and time." Alara leaned over her shoulder, watching as the screen filled with lines of data. "Can you identify anyone who's been unusually active? Maybe someone who wasn't supposed to be?" "Give me a moment," Mira said, narrowing her focus. "I'll find out who's been in contact with the intruders." Alara felt the weight of anticipation in the air as they waited, the silence punctuated only by Mira's tapping. Riven kept watch by the door, his posture tense. After a few minutes, Mira's eyes widened. "I think I found something. Look at this. These timestamps show that someone on the inside has been communicating with the intruders during key moments." Alara leaned closer, her breath hitching in her throat. "Who is it?" "It's Dr. Patel," Mira said, her voice barely above a whisper. He's been in contact with them multiple times over the last few weeks, right before major decisions were made. Riven's expression darkened. That can't be a coincidence. No, Ilara replied, her mind racing. But why? What does he stand to gain from this? Mira scrolled through the data, her frown deepening. It looks like he's been sending them detailed reports about our research progress. He's trying to undermine our work. Riven clenched his fists. We need to confront him. If he's behind this, we can't let him continue. But how do we know he's not working under duress? Ilara countered, a nagging doubt creeping in. What if they have something on him? Mira looked up, her expression conflicted. We can't ignore the evidence. If he's working with the intruders, we need to act fast before he causes any more damage. Ilara nodded, her heart racing. Then we need to gather a small team, someone we can trust to confront him. If he is the mole, we can't let him alert the others. Riven agreed. Let's go. We can't waste any more time. Mira shut down the terminal and pocketed the secure drive. I'll follow your lead. Just be careful. As they left the storage room, Ilara felt a sense of urgency pushing them forward. They navigated the corridors, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The tension hung in the air, thick and palpable. Keep your eyes open, Riven warned as they approached Dr. Patel's office. We don't know if he's expecting us. Ilara nodded, adrenaline surging through her veins. Let's do this. They reached the office door, and Riven turned to them, his expression serious. If he's working with the intruders, we need to be ready for anything. Ilara took a deep breath, steeling herself. On 3. 1, 2, 3. Riven pushed the door open, and they stepped inside. The office was dimly lit, papers strewn across the desk. Dr. Patel sat behind it, looking up in surprise as they entered. What's going on? He asked, feigning innocence. Why are you here? Ilara's heart raced. We know about your communications with the intruders, Dr. Patel. You need to tell us the truth. His expression shifted, panic flashing in his eyes. I don't know what you're talking about. I've been working on my research, same as always. Cut the act, Riven said, his voice firm. We have the logs. We know you've been feeding them information. Dr. Patel's demeanor hardened, a flicker of defiance crossing his face. You don't understand. This isn't what it seems. Then explain it to us, Ilara demanded, stepping closer. What are you working on with them? He hesitated, glancing toward the door as if weighing his options. If you only knew what they were offering. What they're offering is treason, Riven shouted, his voice echoing in the small space. You're putting everyone in danger. I'm trying to save this facility, Dr. Patel retorted, his voice rising. The research you're doing could lead to catastrophic consequences. They want to help us. Help us? Ilara interrupted, incredulous. By stealing our work? By sabotaging everything we've built? He stood up, his hands raised defensively. You don't understand the bigger picture. They're offering funding, resources, everything we need to make real progress. By selling us out? Riven shot back. You're deluded if you think this is going to end well. Ilara took a step closer, determined to break through his facade. Dr. Patel, this isn't just about you. People's lives are at stake. If you continue down this path, you'll lose everything. He looked conflicted, torn between fear and ambition. I'm not the only one involved. You have to believe me. They know things about our research that could change everything. And you thought betraying your colleagues was the way to go? Ilara pressed. This isn't progress, it's a betrayal. Dr. Patel's resolve faltered, and for a moment, Ilara thought she could reach him. Think about what you're doing, she pleaded. We can help each other. We're working toward the same goal, just in different ways. He looked away, anguish etched across his features. I didn't want to, but they threatened my family. I couldn't risk it. Ilara's heart sank at Dr. Patel's admission. She had expected anger, defiance, perhaps even an attempt to downplay his actions, but this was different. The fear in his eyes spoke volumes. "Threatened your family?" she asked softly, trying to bridge the emotional chasm that had formed between them. "What do you mean?" Dr. Patel ran a hand through his hair, pacing the room. "I didn't want to believe them at first. They claimed they had someone watching my family, that they could hurt them if I didn't comply. I thought it was a bluff, but it isn't," Riven interjected, his voice stern. "And that doesn't excuse what you've done." "Riven," Alara cautioned, sensing the tension escalating. "Let him explain. We need to understand." Dr. Patel paused, his expression tormented. "I thought I could stall them, buy some time to protect my family. But it spiraled out of control. They wanted details about the virus, about our research, and I felt trapped. I didn't know who else to turn to." Alara took a deep breath, her mind racing. If they know about the virus, they must understand its potential. This isn't just about research anymore, it's about control. "Yes," Dr. Patel replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "They see it as a weapon, and they're willing to do anything to get it." "Then we can't let that happen," Riven said, his tone resolute. "We need to stop them, and we need to do it now." Alara nodded, a sense of urgency flooding her thoughts. "But how do we do that? If Dr. Patel is right, they have resources and connections we can't compete with." "First, we need to ensure Dr. Patel's family is safe," Riven said, his focus sharpening. "If he's telling the truth, they're in danger. We can't let them become collateral damage in this." Dr. Patel looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. "You'd do that? You'd help them?" Alara exchanged a glance with Riven, who nodded. "We will. But you need to be honest with us. You have to tell us everything you know about their operations, their plans." "I can do that," he said, his voice steadier now. "I have some information about their contacts. I thought I could play both sides, but I'm done with that. I can't let them win." "Good," Riven said. "Let's start with what you know." Dr. Patel moved to his desk, rifling through papers until he pulled out a folder. "This contains everything I've gathered: names, communication methods, even locations. It's not much, but it might help." Alara took the folder, her fingers trembling slightly as she flipped through the pages. Each name listed was a potential threat, a connection to the looming danger that hovered over them. "We need to disseminate this information quickly. If we're going to take action, we need to be coordinated." Mira, who had been quietly absorbing the exchange, spoke up. "We can use the secure drive to transmit the information to trusted allies. If we can get them involved, we might have a fighting chance." "Good idea," Alara agreed. "But we need to make sure our communication lines are secure. The last thing we need is for them to intercept our plans." As they strategized, Alara felt a growing sense of determination. They were fighting against not only an external threat, but also a betrayal from within. The stakes had never been higher. "Let's split up," Riven suggested. "I can head to the communications room and make sure our signals are secure. Alara, you can stay with Dr. Patel and go over the data. Mira, keep working on securing our systems." "Agreed," Alara said, her mind racing with possibilities. "But let's stay in contact. If anything goes wrong, we need to regroup." Riven nodded and moved toward the door, glancing back once more. "Stay alert. We can't afford any mistakes." Once he was gone, Alara turned her attention to Dr. Patel. "Let's go over everything you have. I want to know their methods, their connections, anything that can help us." Dr. Patel nodded, his expression somber. "I've kept records of my communications with them. They prefer encrypted messages and use disposable accounts to avoid detection." Alara leaned closer as he pulled out another document, highlighting key points. "This is their primary contact, a woman named Asha. She's been the one reaching out to me, always pushing for more information." "Asha," Alara repeated, committing the name to memory. "Do you know where she operates from?" "She mentioned a warehouse on the outskirts of the city," Dr. Patel said, biting his lip. "It's where they meet and discuss plans. I haven't been there, but I have the address." Can we use that information? Alara asked, her heart racing at the thought of a potential lead. Yes, he replied, looking relieved. If we can intercept their communications or even confront them there, it could change everything. Alara felt a surge of hope, but it was quickly tempered by the reality of their situation. We still need to figure out how to approach this without drawing too much attention. We don't know how many of them are involved. Just then, Mira's voice crackled through the small intercom. I'm monitoring the feeds, and I just picked up chatter about a planned attack. They're mobilizing. Alara's stomach dropped. How soon? Within the hour, Mira replied, urgency in her tone. They're sending a team to secure the lab. We need to move now. Dr. Patel, do you have any way to warn your family? Alara asked, her mind racing. Yes, I can send a message, he replied, urgency coloring his words. But we have to be careful. If they're monitoring me, then we'll have to get creative, Alara said, her resolve hardening. We can't leave them unprotected. Agreed, Mira said. I'll help you craft a message. Just make sure it's discreet. Dr. Patel pulled out his phone, glancing at the screen. I can tell them to go to a safe location. We've had a plan in place in case of emergencies. As he composed a message, Alara felt the weight of time pressing down on them. They were on a ticking clock, and every second mattered. Done, Dr. Patel said, sending the message. Now what? We need to prepare, Alara said, her voice firm. If they're planning an attack, we can't wait for them to come to us. We have to take the fight to them. Mira spoke up, her voice steady. I can keep monitoring their communications and provide updates. If they start moving, I'll let you know. Good, Alara replied, her mind racing with potential strategies. Dr. Patel, we need your insights on the layout of the warehouse. If we're going to intercept them, we need to know what we're dealing with. Dr. Patel nodded, pulling out a rough sketch he had drawn from memory. This is what I know. There are multiple entrances, but they tend to favor the loading dock. That's where I think they'll be meeting. Alara studied the sketch, mentally plotting their approach. We can set up an ambush at the loading dock. If we can catch them off guard, we might be able to take them out before they can react. What about backup? Dr. Patel asked, concern etched on his face. Once we get there, we can signal Mira for support, Alara replied. But we have to be quick. The longer we wait, the more time they have to prepare. Mira's voice came through the intercom again. I'm picking up more chatter. They're definitely mobilizing. You don't have much time. Alara felt a surge of adrenaline. Then it settled. We move now. They gathered their things, adrenaline coursing through their veins as they prepared to confront the very threat that had put them all in danger. Alara could feel the weight of responsibility on her shoulders, but it was accompanied by a sense of purpose. They were no longer just reacting, they were taking the fight to their enemies. Let's go, she said, leading the way out of the office and into the hallways. They moved quickly, their footsteps echoing against the cold concrete. The air felt charged with tension as they approached the exit of the facility. Alara glanced back at Dr. Patel, who seemed to be grappling with his own emotions. Are you ready for this? She asked, her voice steady. I have to be, he replied, determination settling into his features. I can't let them win, not after everything. As they stepped outside, the evening sky loomed above them, dark clouds gathering as if reflecting the storm brewing within their hearts. They had a mission, and failure was not an option. Stay close, Riven instructed as they neared the vehicles. We'll drive to the warehouse and assess the situation from there. Alara nodded, her senses heightened. They climbed into the vehicles, the tension palpable as they prepared for what lay ahead. As they sped toward the outskirts of the city, Alara's mind raced with possibilities. The confrontation they were heading into could change everything. Alara felt the weight of the world pressing down on her as they sprinted down the narrow hallway, the echo of their pursuers growing louder behind them. The dim lighting cast long shadows along the walls, intensifying the sense of urgency. Is this the right way? She gasped, adrenaline surging through her. Just keep going, Dr. Patel urged, glancing back to see if they were still being followed. The fire exit should be just ahead. The sound of heavy boots thundered closer, and Alara could feel her heart racing in response. They had to reach that exit. If they didn't, the consequences could be catastrophic not just for them, but for the entire operation. Almost there, Dr. Patel shouted, and they rounded a corner, skidding to a halt in front of a heavy steel door marked with a bright red sign, Fire Exit. Push! Alara cried, throwing herself against the door. It swung open with a loud creak, revealing a stairwell leading down into darkness. They plunged through the doorway, Dr. Patel close behind, and Alara slammed the door shut just as the first of their pursuers rounded the corner. She braced her back against the door, her breath coming in short gasps as she listened intently to the footsteps outside. Do you think they saw us? Dr. Patel whispered, his voice tight with anxiety. I don't know, Alara replied, straining to hear any signs of pursuit. But we need to keep moving. They'll be looking for us. They turned and hurried down the stairwell, the air thick with dust and tension. Each step echoed ominously in the confined space, and Alara felt a growing sense of dread. She could only hope that Riven was managing to keep himself safe, and that he had a plan of his own. Reaching the bottom, they found themselves in a dimly lit basement corridor. The air was cool and stale, and Alara could barely make out the shapes of old crates and discarded machinery lining the walls. Which way now? She asked, peering into the darkness. Let's head toward the back of the building, Dr. Patel suggested. If we can find a way out, we'll be safer there. They moved cautiously, the weight of uncertainty hanging heavily over them. The only sounds were their hurried footsteps and the distant hum of machinery, creating an eerie atmosphere. Alara's mind raced with possibilities, trying to anticipate their next move. As they reached another junction, a flickering overhead light momentarily lit the path ahead. This way, Alara urged, instinctively veering left. The corridor opened up into a larger room, filled with shadows that danced in the dim light. Alara paused, scanning the area for any signs of danger. In the far corner, she spotted a large roll-up door, likely leading to the outside. That could be our way out, Dr. Patel said, pointing toward the door. Let's check it out, Alara replied, but as they stepped further into the room, she felt a prickling sensation at the back of her neck, a sure sign they were not alone. Suddenly, the overhead lights flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness. Alara's heart raced as she strained to see anything in the pitch-black room. Stay close, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. Then, a voice echoed through the darkness. Looking for something? Alara froze, recognizing the tone immediately. It was Ashad, her voice dripping with confidence and malice. You're in quite a predicament, aren't you? Run, Alara hissed at Dr. Patel, but before they could move, the sound of heavy footsteps surrounded them. Alara cursed under her breath, knowing they were cornered. Ashad, you won't get away with this, she called out, trying to stall for time. Oh, I think I will, Ashad replied, her voice chillingly calm. You see, you've stumbled into a situation far beyond your comprehension, and now you're trapped. The lights flickered back on, Ashad and several of her henchmen standing at the far end of the room. Alara's pulse quickened as she assessed their options. The roll-up door was still a few feet away, but with Ashad's group blocking the way, escape was looking increasingly unlikely. Don't be foolish, Ashad said, her expression a mix of amusement and irritation. You can't run from what's coming. You think you can thwart our plans? You're just delaying the inevitable. Alara glanced at Dr. Patel, whose face was a mask of fear and determination. We need to make a break for it, she said, steeling herself for action. Are you crazy? Dr. Patel replied, his voice shaky. We can't just run into them. But we can't stay here either, Alara insisted. We need to create a diversion and get to that door. Before Dr. Patel could respond, Alara spotted a metal pipe lying on the floor. Give me a boost, she said, pointing at the pipe. He hesitated, but then nodded, realizing they didn't have a choice. Together, they moved toward the pipe. Ilara picked it up, feeling its weight in her hands, and took a deep breath. "Hey," she shouted, drawing Ashaz's attention. "If you want the virus, come and get it." Ashaz's eyes narrowed as she stepped forward. "You think you can play games with me? You have no idea what you're up against." With her heart racing, Ilara swung the pipe, aiming for the nearest stack of crates. The metal clanged against wood, sending them tumbling to the ground with a loud crash. "Now," Ilara shouted, and they bolted toward the roll-up door, adrenaline propelling them forward. But Ashaz was quick, barking orders to her men. "Stop them! Don't let them escape!" Ilara could hear the rush of footsteps behind them as they raced for the door. She reached for the handle, pulling with all her strength. The door rattled but didn't budge. "It's locked," she shouted, panic rising within her. "Let me," Dr. Patel said, pushing her aside. He fumbled with the mechanism, his fingers trembling. Come on, come on." Just then, the first of Ashaz's men reached them, a hulking figure with a menacing glare. "You're not going anywhere," he growled, advancing toward them. Ilara turned, adrenaline coursing through her. "We have to hold him off," she shouted, grabbing the pipe once more. "No," Dr. Patel exclaimed, his voice filled with urgency. "We can't fight them." But Ilara couldn't back down. With a burst of determination, she swung the pipe at the approaching man, connecting with his shoulder. He stumbled back, momentarily thrown off balance. "Get the door open," Ilara yelled, her heart racing as she prepared for another swing. Dr. Patel's face was pale, but he kept working on the door. "I'm trying," he shouted, panic creeping into his voice. "Now," Ilara shouted as the man recovered, advancing again with a snarl. She swung the pipe once more, aiming for his legs, but he dodged, grabbing her wrist instead. A sharp pain shot through her as he twisted her arm. "You're going to regret that," he growled, raising his other hand. Just then, a loud crash echoed through the room as Riven burst in, flanked by a couple of other allies. "Get away from her," he shouted, lunging at the hulking man. "Riven," Ilara gasped, her heart lifting at the sight of him. Riven tackled the man to the ground, the two grappling for control. "Dr. Patel, the door," he yelled, and Dr. Patel scrambled to follow the instructions. Ilara took advantage of the distraction, wrenching her arm free and grabbing the pipe again. "Get back," she shouted, swinging it at the nearest henchman approaching Riven. The pipe connected with a satisfying thud, sending the man sprawling. "Keep going," Riven shouted, throwing another punch as he struggled against the weight of the larger man. "Get that door open." Dr. Patel worked frantically, sweat beading on his forehead. "Almost there," he called out, his voice strained. With every ounce of strength left, Ilara swung the pipe again, fending off another attacker while Riven continued to wrestle with the first man. The chaos felt like a whirlwind around her, but she focused on the door, praying they would escape. Finally, with a loud clank, Dr. Patel managed to disengage the lock. "It's open," he shouted. "Go, go, go," Riven yelled, finally managing to throw the larger man off him. Ilara dashed toward the door, heart racing. "Come on," she urged Dr. Patel as he stumbled after her. They burst through the roll-up door into the cool night air, the moon light their escape route. Ilara's lungs filled with fresh air, and for a moment, hope surged within her. But the night wasn't over yet. As they took off running, the sound of shouting echoed behind them, and she knew Ashaz and her men would be right on their heels. "Where to?" Riven asked, sprinting alongside them, his expression tense. Ilara felt the weight of the world pressing down on her as they sprinted down the narrow hallway, the echo of their pursuers growing louder behind them. The dim lighting cast long shadows along the walls, intensifying the sense of urgency. "Is this the right way?" she gasped, adrenaline surging through her. "Just keep going," Dr. Patel urged, glancing back to see if they were still being followed. "The fire exit should be just ahead." The sound of heavy boots thundered closer, and Alara could feel her heart racing in response. They had to reach that exit. If they didn't, the consequences could be catastrophic not just for them, but for the entire operation. Almost there, Dr. Patel shouted, and they rounded a corner, skidding to a halt in front of a heavy steel door marked with a bright red sign, "Fire Exit." "Push!" Alara cried, throwing herself against the door. It swung open with a loud creak, revealing a stairwell leading down into darkness. They plunged through the doorway, Dr. Patel close behind, and Alara slammed the door shut just as the first of their pursuers rounded the corner. She braced her back against the door, her breath coming in short gasps as she listened intently to the footsteps outside. "Do you think they saw us?" Dr. Patel whispered, his voice tight with anxiety. "I don't know," Alara replied, straining to hear any signs of pursuit. "But we need to keep moving. They'll be looking for us." They turned and hurried down the stairwell, the air thick with dust and tension. Each step echoed ominously in the confined space, and Alara felt a growing sense of dread. She could only hope that Riven was managing to keep himself safe, and that he had a plan of his own. Reaching the bottom, they found themselves in a dimly lit basement corridor. The air was cool and stale, and Alara could barely make out the shapes of old crates and discarded machinery lining the walls. "Which way now?" she asked, peering into the darkness. "Let's head toward the back of the building," Dr. Patel suggested. "If we can find a way out, we'll be safer there." They moved cautiously, the weight of uncertainty hanging heavily over them. The only sounds were their hurried footsteps and the distant hum of machinery, creating an eerie atmosphere. Alara's mind raced with possibilities, trying to anticipate their next move. As they reached another junction, a flickering overhead light momentarily lit the path ahead. "This way," Alara urged, instinctively veering left. The corridor opened up into a larger room, filled with shadows that danced in the dim light. Alara paused, scanning the area for any signs of danger. In the far corner, she spotted a large roll-up door, likely leading to the outside. "That could be our way out," Dr. Patel said, pointing toward the door. "Let's check it out," Alara replied. But as they stepped further into the room, she felt a prickling sensation at the back of her neck, a sure sign they were not alone. Suddenly, the overhead lights flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness. Alara's heart raced as she strained to see anything in the pitch-black room. "Stay close," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. Then, a voice echoed through the darkness. "Looking for something." Alara froze, recognizing the tone immediately. It was Ashak, her voice dripping with confidence and malice. "You're in quite a predicament, aren't you?" "Run," Alara hissed at Dr. Patel, but before they could move, the sound of heavy footsteps surrounded them. Alara cursed under her breath, knowing they were cornered. "Asha, you won't get away with this," she called out, trying to stall for time. "Oh, I think I will," Asha replied, her voice chillingly calm. "You see, you've stumbled into a situation far beyond your comprehension, and now you're trapped." The lights flickered back on, light Asha and several of her henchmen standing at the far end of the room. Alara's pulse quickened as she assessed their options. The roll-up door was still a few feet away, but with Asha's group blocking the way, escape was looking increasingly unlikely. "Don't be foolish," Asha said, her expression a mix of amusement and irritation. "You can't run from what's coming. You think you can thwart our plans. You're just delaying the inevitable." Alara glanced at Dr. Patel, whose face was a mask of fear and determination. "We need to make a break for it," she said, steeling herself for action. "Are you crazy?" Dr. Patel replied, his voice shaky. "We can't just run into them." "But we can't stay here either," Alara insisted. "We need to create a diversion and get to that door." Before Dr. Patel could respond, Alara spotted a metal pipe lying on the floor. "Give me a boost," she said, pointing at the pipe. He hesitated, but then nodded, realizing they didn't have a choice. Together, they moved toward the pipe. Alara picked it up, feeling its weight in her hands, and took a deep breath. "Hey!" she shouted, drawing Asha's attention. If you want the virus, come and get it. Asha's eyes narrowed as she stepped forward. You think you can play games with me? You have no idea what you're up against. With her heart racing, Alara swung the pipe, aiming for the nearest stack of crates. The metal clanged against wood, sending them tumbling to the ground with a loud crash. Now, Alara shouted, and they bolted toward the roll-up door, adrenaline propelling them forward. But Asha was quick, barking orders to her men. Stop them. Don't let them escape. Alara could hear the rush of footsteps behind them as they raced for the door. She reached for the handle, pulling with all her strength. The door rattled but didn't budge. It's locked, she shouted, panic rising within her. Let me, Dr. Patel said, pushing her aside. He fumbled with the mechanism, his fingers trembling. Come on, come on. Just then, the first of Asha's men reached them, a hulking figure with a menacing glare. You're not going anywhere, he growled, advancing toward them. Alara turned, adrenaline coursing through her. We have to hold him off, she shouted, grabbing the pipe once more. No, Dr. Patel exclaimed, his voice filled with urgency. We can't fight them. But Alara couldn't back down. With a burst of determination, she swung the pipe at the approaching man, connecting with his shoulder. He stumbled back, momentarily thrown off balance. Get the door open, Alara yelled, her heart racing as she prepared for another swing. Dr. Patel's face was pale, but he kept working on the door. I'm trying, he shouted, panic creeping into his voice. Now, Alara shouted as the man recovered, advancing again with a snarl. She swung the pipe once more, aiming for his legs, but he dodged, grabbing her wrist instead. A sharp pain shot through her as he twisted her arm. You're going to regret that, he growled, raising his other hand. Just then, a loud crash echoed through the room as Riven burst in, flanked by a couple of other allies. Get away from her, he shouted, lunging at the hulking man. Riven, Alara gasped, her heart lifting at the sight of him. Riven tackled the man to the ground, the two grappling for control. Dr. Patel, the door, he yelled, and Dr. Patel scrambled to follow the instructions. Alara took advantage of the distraction, wrenching her arm free and grabbing the pipe again. Get back, she shouted, swinging it at the nearest henchman approaching Riven. The pipe connected with a satisfying thud, sending the man sprawling. Keep going, Riven shouted, throwing another punch as he struggled against the weight of the larger man. Get that door open. Dr. Patel worked frantically, sweat beading on his forehead. Almost there, he called out, his voice strained. With every ounce of strength left, Alara swung the pipe again, fending off another attacker while Riven continued to wrestle with the first man. The chaos felt like a whirlwind around her, but she focused on the door, praying they would escape. Finally, with a loud clank, Dr. Patel managed to disengage the lock. It's open, he shouted. Go, 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 Riven yelled, finally managing to throw the larger man off him. Alara dashed toward the door, heart racing. Come on, she urged Dr. Patel as he stumbled after her. They burst through the roll-up door into the cool night air, the moon light their escape route. Alara's lungs filled with fresh air, and for a moment, hope surged within her. But the night wasn't over yet. As they took off running, the sound of shouting echoed behind them, and she knew Asha and her men would be right on their heels. Where to? Riven asked, sprinting alongside them, his expression tense. The cool night air hit Alara like a shockwave as they burst out of the warehouse. The chaos behind them was momentarily drowned out by the rush of adrenaline, but reality quickly set in. They were still in danger, and every second counted. Where to? Riven asked, glancing over his shoulder. The distant sounds of shouting and heavy footsteps echoed behind them, a stark reminder that they weren't safe yet. Head for the tree line, Alara shouted, pointing toward a dense cluster of trees about 100 yards away. We can lose them in the forest. Dr. Patel followed closely, his breath coming in labored gasps. I hope you're right, he said, fear etched on his face. As they sprinted, the night seemed to close in around them, the shadows of the trees looming like sentinels waiting to embrace them. The ground was uneven, and Alara stumbled once, but she pushed herself back up, determination propelling her forward. The sound of their pursuers grew fainter, but Alara knew they couldn't slow down. They reached the edge of the trees and plunged into the underbrush, the thick foliage providing some cover from prying eyes. "Where do we go from here?" Dr. Patel panted, looking around. The darkness felt oppressive, and the forest seemed alive with rustling leaves and distant animal calls. "Let's find a place to hide," Alara suggested, scanning the area for a suitable spot. "Somewhere they can't easily find us." Riven nodded, his jaw set. "Over there." He pointed to a cluster of bushes and a fallen tree that looked like it could provide good cover. They hurried toward it, squeezing into the cramped space, hearts racing. Alara pressed her back against the rough bark of the fallen tree, trying to steady her breathing. "Are we safe?" Dr. Patel whispered, peering out from their hiding spot. "For now," Alara replied, but doubt gnawed at her. They had evaded Asha and her men, but for how long? She could already feel the tension building again as her mind raced with thoughts of what might happen next. After a few moments of silence, Riven spoke up. "We need to regroup and come up with a plan. There's no way we can just sit here indefinitely." "Right," Alara said, pushing back the rising panic. "We need to figure out what we know. Dr. Patel, what did you manage to get from that operation folder?" He reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone. "I got some pictures, but I didn't have time to thoroughly review everything. There were blueprints and logistics for transporting the virus, along with a timeline for a release." "A release?" Riven asked, brow furrowing. "Are they planning to spread it?" Dr. Patel nodded, his face pale in the dim light. It looked like they were preparing for a large-scale distribution. The timeline indicated they intended to move quickly tonight, if possible. Alara felt a chill run down her spine. "If they're serious about this, we have to stop them. We can't let that virus get out." Riven looked between them, determination hardening his features. "So what's the plan? We can't go back to the warehouse, it's too dangerous." "No," Alara agreed, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. "But we need to inform the authorities. They can help us neutralize this threat before it escalates." "Do you really think they'll listen to us?" Dr. Patel questioned, doubt creeping into his voice. "After everything that's happened?" Alara glanced at him, then at Riven. "We don't have a choice. If we don't act now, we risk countless lives. We have to find a way to get the evidence into the right hands." Riven nodded, steeling himself. "Okay, there's a road about a mile from here. If we can make it there, we can flag down a car or find a way to call for help." Alara took a deep breath, trying to quell the rising anxiety. "Let's do it. But we need to be careful, they'll be searching for us." They carefully made their way out of their hiding spot, slipping back into the cover of the trees. The moon hung high above, casting an ethereal glow that lit their path just enough for them to navigate through the underbrush. As they moved, Alara couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sent her heart racing. "Stay close," she whispered, glancing back to make sure they were still together. After what felt like an eternity, they finally reached the edge of the forest. The road stretched out before them. But as they emerged into the open, Ilara's stomach dropped. A car was parked at the side of the road, its headlights cutting through the darkness. But it wasn't just any car, it was a sleek black SUV, the kind often associated with corporate security. "Is that?" Riven started, his voice trailing off as he squinted at the vehicle. "It belongs to them," Alara said, feeling a rush of panic. "They're already here." "Quick, behind the bushes," Dr. Patel urged, ducking down just as the vehicle's doors swung open. Alara's heart raced as she peered through the leaves, trying to get a better view. Two figures stepped out of the SUV, and her stomach churned as she recognized Asha and the scarred man. "This isn't good," Riven muttered, his eyes wide with fear. "What are they doing here?" Asha stood by the passenger side, her expression cold and calculating. Spread out, she commanded her men, who were now emerging from the back of the vehicle. They can't have gotten far. Ilara felt the knot in her stomach tighten. They're looking for us. We need to get out of here, now. But as they began to retreat back into the trees, Ilara's foot snagged on a root, sending her sprawling to the ground. She barely stifled a gasp as she hit the earth, heart pounding in her ears. "Are you okay?" Riven whispered, rushing to help her up. "I'm fine, just," Ilara started, but her voice cut off as Asha turned, her sharp gaze locking on to their hiding spot. "There," Asha shouted, pointing. "They're over there." "Run," Ilara yelled, adrenaline surging as she scrambled to her feet. They bolted back into the trees, but the sound of footsteps was close behind. "This way," Riven called, veering to the right as they navigated through the underbrush. The forest felt alive around them, branches snagging at their clothes and roots threatening to trip them up. Ilara's lungs burned as they pushed forward, the fear of capture driving them deeper into the darkened woods. "Keep moving," Dr. Patel urged, glancing back as Asha's men shouted and followed their trail. Suddenly, Riven skidded to a stop. "This way. We can lose them near the creek." Ilara didn't hesitate. She followed Riven as they veered toward the sound of rushing water. The narrow path they were on opened up into a small clearing, and the moonlight glimmered on the surface of the creek, like the chaos surrounding them. "We can hide under the bridge," Riven suggested, pointing to a low archway covered in vines. "If we stay quiet, they might pass right over us." "Let's go," Ilara said, urgency coursing through her. They ducked under the bridge, the sound of the water rushing overhead drowning out their breaths. As they crouched in the darkness, Ilara could hear the footsteps approaching, the voices of Asha's men growing louder. "They went this way. Search everywhere." Ilara held her breath, her heart pounding in her ears as she pressed herself against the cold stone. Riven and Dr. Patel were both tense, their eyes wide with fear. "What if they find us?" Dr. Patel whispered, his voice shaky. "They won't," Ilara assured him, though doubt gnawed at her. They had to be quiet and patient, but as the moments stretched on, the tension felt unbearable. The voices grew closer, and Ilara caught snippets of their conversation. "They couldn't have gone far. Check the creek. They might be hiding under the bridge." "Spread out," Asha ordered, her voice sharp and authoritative. "We need to find them before they get to the main road." Ilara's heart sank. They were still searching, and every second felt like an eternity. Then, just as she thought they might be discovered, the sound of footsteps moved past the bridge, fading into the distance. "This way," one of the men called. "They must have gone further up the creek." Ilara waited, holding her breath until the last echoes of their voices faded away. "I think we're safe," she whispered, letting out a shaky breath. Riven slowly stood up, peering out from under the bridge. "For now," he said cautiously, "but we can't stay here for long." Dr. Patel nodded, his eyes wide with anxiety. "We need to keep moving, but where do we go?" Ilara thought quickly. "We need to find a way to get to the main road. If we can flag down a car or find a phone, we can call for help." "Okay," Riven agreed, stepping out from the cover of the bridge. Ilara emerged from the shadow of the bridge, glancing cautiously around the clearing. The moonlight filtered through the branches overhead, like the creek's swift current, and she felt a momentary sense of calm. They were alive, but the danger was still very real. "Let's keep moving," Riven said, breaking the moment of stillness. "We can't linger here." Dr. Patel joined them, his brow furrowed with concern. "We need to stay low and move quietly. Asha won't give up easily." Ilara nodded, her mind racing as they set off along the creek's bank, keeping to the cover of trees and underbrush. The sound of rushing water masked their footsteps, but the threat of Asha's men still loomed large in her mind. As they moved, Ilara couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. They needed to act quickly to stop whatever Asha and her team were planning. The thought of the virus being released into the world sent a chill down her spine. After several minutes of navigating through the dense forest, They reached a wider part of the creek where the water was shallow enough to cross. Riven halted, surveying the area. "Here's our chance," he said. "If we can get to the other side, we can head toward the main road without being seen." Dr. Patel looked skeptical. "What if they're already on the other side?" "We'll have to take that risk," Ilara replied, steeling her resolve. "It's our best option." Without waiting for further discussion, she stepped into the cool water, feeling the current tug at her legs as she carefully crossed. Riven and Dr. Patel followed closely, their movements cautious but determined. The water splashed softly around them, and Ilara kept her gaze fixed ahead, focused on the other bank. When they finally reached the opposite side, she climbed up the muddy embankment and turned to help the others. "Let's move," Riven urged, pulling himself up with a grunt. As they stepped onto the dry ground, the sound of splashing footsteps echoed from behind them. Ilara's heart dropped. They hadn't been as quiet as she'd hoped. "Run!" she shouted, glancing back at the creek. HFY's men had emerged from the trees, their flashlights bobbing in the darkness. "They're across the creek," one of them yelled, pointing. "Keep going," Dr. Patel urged, and they sprinted into the cover of the trees again, adrenaline propelling them forward. They dashed deeper into the woods, the moonlight now a flickering reminder of their peril. As they ran, Ilara glanced back and caught a glimpse of the searchlights cutting through the darkness, light the trees around them. They were closing in. "Over here!" Riven shouted, veering off the path. He pushed through a thicket of bushes, leading them to a small clearing surrounded by dense undergrowth. "We can hide here." Ilara ducked into the clearing, her heart racing as they huddled together behind a large fallen tree trunk. The sounds of pursuit grew closer, voices shouting and the rustling of leaves. "Did you see which way they went?" HFY's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. "They headed this way," one of the men replied, his footsteps crunching the twigs underfoot. Ilara held her breath, her body tense as they listened to the search team move through the woods. The darkness felt oppressive, and the smell of damp earth filled her nostrils. She stole a glance at Riven and Dr. Patel, both of them wide-eyed and trembling. The voices grew louder, and Ilara's heart raced as she caught sight of a flashlight beam cutting through the trees, dancing dangerously close to their hiding spot. "Check over there," HFY ordered, her tone laced with urgency. Ilara felt her stomach twist in knots. They were seconds away from being discovered. Just then, Riven shifted slightly, and the trunk creaked ominously. "SHH," Ilara hissed, pressing her hand against his mouth, her eyes wide with panic. The flashlight beams swung toward their direction, and Ilara's breath caught in her throat. They couldn't afford to be found now, not when they were so close to stopping HFY's plans. "Move out," HFY shouted, and Ilara felt a surge of hope as the beam moved away, the sound of footsteps retreating into the darkness. They had to use this moment to escape. "Let's go," Ilara whispered, and they carefully slipped out of their hiding place, moving as quietly as possible. Once they were back on the path, Ilara took the lead, guiding them deeper into the woods. The sounds of HFY's men faded, but they couldn't stop yet. They needed to keep putting distance between themselves and the danger. After a few minutes of frantic running, they finally emerged onto a narrow dirt road. It was a quiet, unpaved path, lined with trees on either side. "Do you think we're safe?" Dr. Patel asked, his voice shaky. "For now," Ilara said, trying to keep her own fear at bay. "But we need to find a way to get to the nearest town." Riven nodded, scanning the area. "We should keep moving. Maybe we can flag down a car or find a payphone." Just as they began walking along the road, the distant sound of an engine broke the stillness. Ilara's heart leaped in her chest. "There, a car," she exclaimed, waving her arms to get the driver's attention. The headlights grew closer, light the road ahead. The vehicle, a battered old pickup truck, slowed as it approached, and Ilara felt a mix of hope and trepidation. The truck rolled to a stop beside them, and the driver, an older man with a weathered face, leaned out of the window. You folks in some kind of trouble? He asked, concern etched on his features. Please, we need help, Ilara pleaded, her voice urgent. We're being chased by some dangerous people. The man's gaze shifted to the road behind them, and his expression hardened. Get in, quick. Without hesitation, they jumped into the back of the truck, and the driver slammed the gas pedal down. The truck lurched forward, kicking up dirt as they sped away from the danger. As the trees whizzed past, Ilara felt a rush of relief wash over her. They were moving away from the threat, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't out of danger just yet. Where to? The driver asked, keeping his eyes on the road ahead. Anywhere safe, Ilara replied, catching her breath. Just get us away from here. Got it, he said, glancing back at them through the rearview mirror. You sure you're not in some kind of trouble with the law? We're not criminals, Riven interjected, his voice firm. We're trying to stop a crime. The driver raised an eyebrow, but didn't press further. All right, I'll take you to the nearest town. Just keep your heads down, and don't make any sudden moves. As they drove, Ilara exchanged glances with Riven and Dr. Patel, their expressions a mix of relief and anxiety. They were finally making progress, but the threat still loomed large in her mind. What's the plan once we reach the town? Riven asked, breaking the silence. We need to find a police station, Ilara said, determination creeping back into her voice. We have to share what we know and get help to stop HFY. And if they don't believe us? Dr. Patel asked, worry etched on his face. We'll make them believe us, Ilara replied, her voice steady. We have evidence. We can show them the photos I took of the operation. It's not just our word against theirs. The driver nodded, keeping his focus on the road. Sounds like you've got a fight on your hands. Just stay close, and I'll get you there. After a tense ride, they finally approached the small town, the glow of streetlights breaking through the darkness. The driver turned down a side street, and Ilara felt a flicker of hope as they approached a brick building with a sign that read Town Hall. Here we go, the driver said, slowing the truck. This should be a good place to start. They jumped out of the back, and Ilara wasted no time. Thank you, she called to the driver, who nodded and drove away into the night. Let's hurry, Riven urged, leading the way toward the entrance. The three of them rushed up the steps and pushed through the glass doors, the interior dimly lit and eerily quiet. As they stepped inside, a receptionist looked up, surprise evident on her face. Can I help you? She asked, her expression turning wary. We need to speak to someone in charge, Ilara said, urgency coloring her voice. It's an emergency. Please, just a moment, the receptionist replied, picking up the phone. I'll call the chief. Ilara's heart raced as she paced the small lobby, glancing at Riven and Dr. Patel. We need to make sure they take us seriously. Moments later, a heavy-set man in a police uniform emerged from a door at the back. What's going on here? He asked, his voice gruff. Chief, we need your help, Ilara said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of fear and urgency inside her. There's a dangerous operation happening right now, and people's lives are at stake. The chief raised an eyebrow, crossing his arms. Slow down, miss. You can't just walk in here and expect me to take you seriously without some proof. We have proof, Riven interjected, pulling out his phone. We managed to get some documents and photos from the operation. Dr. Patel stepped forward, his hands shaking slightly. They're planning to release a virus. If we don't act now, it could be catastrophic. The chief studied them for a moment, his expression skeptical but intrigued. All right, show me what you have, he said, motioning for them to step into his office. They hurried into the small office, cluttered with files and a bulletin board covered in notices. The chief closed the door behind them, and Ilara pulled up the photos she had taken on her phone. Here, she said, turning the screen toward him. This is the warehouse where they're operating, and here are the blueprints for the virus distribution. They're planning to spread it tonight. The chief leaned closer, examining the images with growing interest. "This looks serious," he said, his brow furrowing. "And you say you have no idea where they're headed?" "We were trying to escape when we got out," Ilara explained. "But they were in pursuit of us, and we couldn't see where they were going." The chief leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting from skepticism to concern. "You realize how dangerous this is, right? If what you're saying is true, we have a real situation on our hands." "Yes, we understand that," Riven replied. "But we need your help to stop them. We can't do it alone." The chief stood up, a new sense of urgency in his demeanor. "All right, I'll need to alert the rest of the department and set up a perimeter. We need to locate this warehouse and intercept them before they can act." Ilara felt a flicker of hope as the chief grabbed a radio from his desk and began speaking to his team. "This is Chief McGregor. We have a potential bioterrorism situation. I need all units on alert. We're responding to a credible threat involving a viral agent. Get a team together and head to the old industrial district." As he spoke, Ilara exchanged glances with Riven and Dr. Patel, a mix of relief and anxiety settling over them. They had taken the first step, but the battle was far from over. "While we wait, can you tell me exactly what you saw?" the chief asked, turning his attention back to them. Ilara took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "We were investigating the facility because we suspected something was off. When we got inside, we found a lab where they were working on the virus, something they called the Harmless virus. But it's anything but harmless. They were planning to distribute it to test how it spreads." "Do you know who's behind this?" Chief McGregor pressed. "Asha and her team," Dr. Patel answered. "They're former researchers who went rogue. They're using this virus for their own purposes." The chief nodded, jotting down notes. "What's your connection to this?" Ilara exchanged a quick glance with Dr. Patel before answering. "We were working on a project to track viral outbreaks and stumbled upon their operation. We had no idea how dangerous it was until it was too late." The chief seemed to consider this. "All right, I need you three to stay put while we coordinate our response. You may be targets, and it's not safe for you to wander off." Ilara nodded, the weight of responsibility heavy on her shoulders. "Understood. We'll stay here." As the chief moved to the door to issue further orders, Ilara felt a surge of determination. "Chief, one more thing. We have to ensure that Asha and her team don't get away. They're highly trained, and they won't hesitate to eliminate anyone who gets in their way." "I understand," he said, looking back at her. "That's why I'm going to put together a tactical response team. We'll make sure they can't escape." Moments later, the chief returned with a couple of officers, instructing them to secure the building and gather additional resources. Ilara, Riven, and Dr. Patel were left in the office, the weight of the situation sinking in. "I hope they can handle this," Riven said, nervously tapping his foot. "What if Asha is already on the move?" "Then we need to be ready," Ilara replied, glancing at the door. "If they're not careful, this could escalate quickly." "Should we do something?" Dr. Patel asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "We can't just sit here." Ilara shook her head. "No, it's too dangerous. We need to trust the police to handle this." But deep down, she felt a growing unease. The clock was ticking, and every moment they waited could mean the difference between stopping the virus and letting it spread. After what felt like an eternity, the chief returned, flanked by several officers in tactical gear. "We're ready to move out," he said, his expression serious. "You three need to stay put. We can't afford to lose you." "I can't just wait here," Ilara insisted. "I need to be involved. We can't let them get away." "Believe me, we're taking this seriously," the chief replied, his tone firm. "But your safety is our priority. If you come with us, you'll be putting yourself in danger." "Then let us help in any way we can," Riven said, stepping forward. "We know the facility and what they're capable of. We can provide intel." The chief considered this, his brow furrowing. "Fine, but you will stay with my team at all times. No heroics, understood?" Ilara nodded, relief flooding her. "Understood." "All right, let's move," Chief McGregor said, gesturing for them to follow. "We're heading to the old industrial district now." As they exited the building, Elara felt a mix of excitement and fear. The streets were quiet, the town bathed in an eerie calm as they piled into police vehicles. She took a deep breath, trying to prepare herself for what lay ahead. The convoy of police cars raced through the streets, sirens blaring as they made their way to the warehouse. Elara sat in the back of one of the vehicles, flanked by Riven and Dr. Patel, the gravity of the situation settling over them like a heavy fog. "Do you think we'll be able to stop them?" Riven asked, his voice tense. Elara glanced out the window, watching the scenery blur past. "We have to. We can't let them unleash that virus." Dr. Patel looked pensive. "But what if they're already in the process of releasing it?" "We'll have to be quick," Elara said, determination fueling her resolve. "We can't let fear hold us back." As they neared the warehouse, Elara's heart raced. The imposing structure loomed in the distance, and she could see the faint glow of lights spilling out from the entrance. "Get ready," Chief McGregor said, his voice low and focused. "We're approaching the target." Elara felt adrenaline surge through her as they arrived, the convoy coming to a halt. Officers spilled out of the vehicles, quickly forming a perimeter around the warehouse. "Stay close," one of the officers instructed them as they exited the vehicle. The tension in the air was palpable as they crept toward the entrance, the sound of muffled voices coming from inside. Elara's mind raced with the possible scenarios. She could almost feel the weight of the virus pressing against her. "On my signal," the chief said, motioning for them to pause. "We're going in." Elara nodded, trying to suppress the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. This was it. They were about to confront HFY and her team, and the fate of countless lives hung in the balance. As they prepared to breach the door, Elara caught Riven's eye. "Whatever happens, we stick together," she said, her voice low but resolute. "Always," he replied, his expression determined. With a nod from the chief, the officers burst through the entrance, Elara, Riven, and Dr. Patel following closely behind. The warehouse was vast and dimly lit, shadows dancing across the walls as they moved deeper inside. "Clear," one of the officers shouted as they fanned out, weapons drawn. Elara's heart raced as she scanned the room, searching for any sign of HFY and her team. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the far side of the warehouse, followed by the sound of shattering glass. "They're here," the chief shouted, urgency in his voice. "Move." Elara felt her pulse quicken as they rushed toward the sound. As they rounded the corner, she saw HFY and two of her men frantically working at a large table covered with vials and equipment. The sight made her stomach drop. "HFY," Elara shouted, her voice rising above the chaos. "Stop this now." HFY looked up, her expression cold and calculating. "You shouldn't have come here, Elara," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. HFY's icy gaze bore into Elara, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. The air crackled with tension as the reality of the moment settled around them. Elara stood firm, her heart racing, surrounded by police officers with weapons drawn and ready. Riven and Dr. Patel flanked her, their expressions a mix of determination and apprehension. "What's your plan, HFY?" Elara demanded, taking a step forward. "You're risking countless lives with this madness." HFY smirked, a glimmer of arrogance in her eyes. "Madness? I call it progress. We're on the brink of a breakthrough, Elara. Just think of the power we could wield with this virus." Dr. Patel stepped up beside Elara, his voice trembling with anger. "You're playing with fire, HFY. This isn't some experiment for a lab. It's a living organism that could destroy everything." The atmosphere thickened as HFY's two accomplices glanced at each other, uncertainty flickering across their faces. Elara seized the moment, sensing the divide within HFY's team. "You don't have to do this," she continued, her voice steadier now. "You can walk away. There's still time to make the right choice." HFY's eyes narrowed, her facade of confidence cracking slightly. "You think I'll just give up? I've invested too much into this. You don't understand what's at stake." Then let us help you understand, Riven interjected, his voice rising. This virus isn't just a tool, it's a weapon. And if you unleash it, you'll be responsible for millions of deaths. At that moment, a loud crash echoed from behind them as the police began to secure the perimeter, their movements swift and precise. Ilara could hear footsteps approaching, the sound of radios crackling with commands. The warehouse was becoming a scene of chaos, and she knew they had to act fast. Your window is closing, Shah, Ilara said, taking a deep breath. You have to decide what kind of legacy you want to leave behind. You're smart. You know this isn't the answer. Ashah's gaze flickered to the table laden with vials, a glimmer of doubt passing across her face. You don't know what it's like to be on the outside, Ilara. You've had everything handed to you while I've had to claw my way up. This is my chance to show the world what I'm capable of. By killing people, Dr. Patel shot back, his voice cracking with emotion. You'll destroy everything you claim to want to change. Ashah's expression hardened again, the moment of vulnerability vanishing. You don't understand, she snapped, her voice rising. I'm not just doing this for myself. I'm doing it for all of us, for those who've been overlooked. Ilara felt a pang of sympathy for Ashah despite her anger. You're wrong. There are better ways to make a difference. This isn't progress, it's destruction. You'll only leave a trail of devastation behind you. Enough, Ashah shouted, her patience wearing thin. She turned to her accomplices, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. We need to initiate the release, now. Wait, one of her men protested, looking uneasy. Maybe we should think this through. But Ashah's eyes gleamed with determination. We don't have time for doubt. This is our moment. With that, she reached for a vial, her fingers trembling with excitement. Ilara's stomach dropped as she realized what was about to happen. No, Ilara shouted, lunging forward. Stop her. The police officers moved in, weapons raised, but Ashah's men quickly positioned themselves between them and the table, their expressions torn. Get back, one of them yelled, brandishing a weapon. We won't let you ruin everything. Chaos erupted as both sides scrambled for control. Ilara felt her pulse race as she struggled to push through the chaos, desperate to reach Ashah before it was too late. Riven, Dr. Patel, she shouted, her voice rising above the noise. We have to stop them. Riven nodded, determination shining in his eyes. I'm right behind you. As Ilara barreled forward, she could feel the tension in the air, a palpable energy that threatened to explode. She dodged past one of Ashah's men, narrowly avoiding a punch aimed at her face. She kept her eyes locked on Ashah, who was still reaching for the vial. Don't do it, Ilara cried, her voice filled with desperation. You're making a mistake. Ashah paused, her hand hovering over the vial as doubt flickered in her eyes. You don't understand what this means to me. You don't know what I've sacrificed. Then let us help you, Ilara urged, closing the distance between them. You don't have to go down this path. But before Ashah could respond, one of the officers lunged forward, attempting to disarm her. In the chaos, the vial slipped from Ashah's hand, crashing to the ground and shattering with a sickening thud. No, Ashah screamed, panic flooding her features as the contents began to spill across the table. Ilara's heart sank. She could see the swirling liquid pooling dangerously close to the edge. If it made contact with the air, the consequences could be dire. Get back, Chief McGregor shouted, directing his team to secure the area. The officers quickly moved to contain the chaos, but the sight of the broken vial sent shockwaves of fear through Ilara. Seal the area, Chief McGregor ordered. We can't let any of this escape. Ilara dashed forward, her heart racing. We have to contain it. Do you have any neutralizing agents? I'm not sure, Dr. Patel shouted back, frantically scanning the equipment on the table. They could have something here, but we need to act fast. Riven grabbed a nearby container, frantically reading the labels. This could be a disinfectant. It might work. Pour it over the spill, Ilara shouted, urgency flooding her voice. Quick. Riven wasted no time, pouring the contents over the broken vial. The liquid hissed as it made contact, creating a cloud of steam that filled the air. Alara felt a momentary sense of relief, but it was short-lived as Asha turned to them, fury igniting in her eyes. "You think this is over?" Asha shouted, her voice filled with rage. "You've just made a huge mistake." Before Alara could respond, Asha lunged toward another table, grabbing a handful of vials and hurling them at the officers. The glass shattered, and Alara felt the air grow heavy with the acrid scent of chemicals. "Stop her!" Chief McGregor shouted, but it was too late. Asha's men sprang into action, and the warehouse erupted into chaos once more. Alara felt a surge of adrenaline as she moved to protect Riven and Dr. Patel, dodging debris as Asha's team fought back against the officers. The sound of shattering glass and shouts filled the air, and Alara knew they had to get control of the situation. "Riven, Dr. Patel, we need to regroup," Alara shouted, scanning the room for a safe spot. "Over there," Riven pointed to a small alcove where they could take cover. They rushed toward it, narrowly avoiding a scuffle between an officer and one of Asha's men. Alara felt the heat of the moment pulse through her veins, the chaos fueling her determination. "Is everyone okay?" Alara asked once they reached the alcove, glancing at Riven and Dr. Patel. "We're fine, but we need to stop Asha before she can do any more damage," Dr. Patel replied, his face set with resolve. Alara nodded, steeling herself. "We can't let her get away with this. We need to turn the tide." Just then, a loud crash echoed through the warehouse, drawing their attention. They peeked out to see Asha and her remaining men making a desperate push toward a side exit, where a dim light shone through. "They're trying to escape," Riven exclaimed, his eyes wide. "We have to stop them." Chief McGregor was directing his officers to contain the chaos, but Alara felt a surge of responsibility. "Let's go," she shouted, charging back into the fray. As they maneuvered through the chaos, Alara felt her heart pounding in her chest. They had to confront Asha before she could escape and unleash whatever plans she had. "Stay close," she called out, pushing forward as they dodged around an officer trying to apprehend one of Asha's men. "Over there," Dr. Patel shouted, pointing to a path leading toward the exit. Alara nodded, her determination igniting. They pressed forward, weaving through the throng of people, their eyes set on Asha. Just as they reached the doorway, Asha turned, her expression fierce. "Get away from me," Asha shouted, raising a weapon threateningly. "Don't do this," Alara cried, her voice urgent. "You can still stop this madness." But Asha's resolve hardened. "You don't understand anything. This is my chance to be heard." Asha stood at the doorway, a tense standoff brewing in the thick air of the warehouse. Her weapon gleamed ominously in the low light, but Alara could see the cracks in her facade, a flicker of doubt, a hint of fear. "Asha, please," Alara pleaded, stepping forward. "You don't want this. You're risking everything for a chance at power. But it's not worth the lives you'll destroy." Asha's finger twitched on the trigger, the chaos of the moment swirling around them. "You think you can just lecture me? You've never had to fight for anything. You've always had people to protect you." Alara felt a surge of frustration. "That's not true. I've fought every day to prove myself. But I know this isn't the way. There's always another choice." Asha hesitated, and for a moment, Alara thought she saw a glimpse of the person she once knew. "You don't understand what I've lost. I've sacrificed everything for this." Dr. Patel stepped forward cautiously. "Asha, we can help you find a better path. You don't have to do this alone. There are ways to make your voice heard without resorting to violence." But Asha's expression hardened again. "No one can help me now. You're either with me or against me." The tension escalated as Asha's accomplices moved in closer, ready to defend their leader. Alara could sense the desperation in the room. They were all caught in a web of fear and ambition. "Let's not make this worse," Riven interjected, his voice steady but urgent. "We can still resolve this without anyone getting hurt. Just put the weapon down." "You don't get it," Asha shouted, her voice rising in anger. "This is bigger than you. This is about survival." Suddenly, the lights flickered overhead, casting eerie shadows across the room. The officers outside shouted commands, their movements hurried as they tried to contain the chaos spilling out from the warehouse. "Asha, listen to me," Alara pressed, her heart racing. "You're smart. You know that this virus is dangerous. If you unleash it, you'll be creating more enemies than you can imagine. You'll lose everything you claim to fight for." Asha's gaze wavered, and Alara saw the conflict playing out in her eyes. "What do you know about losing everything?" Asha spat, her voice trembling with emotion. "You've had it easy. You don't know what it's like to fight for recognition, to be pushed aside." "I do know," Alara replied, her voice steady. "I've faced my own battles. I know what it means to feel powerless. But I also know that revenge and anger won't change anything. They'll only lead to more pain." For a moment, Asha seemed to consider her words, the grip on her weapon loosening ever so slightly. The chaos around them faded into a distant roar, and Alara felt a glimmer of hope. "We can help you," Alara said softly, stepping closer, her voice earnest. "Let us find a way to make a real difference together. There are other ways to fight for what you believe in. You don't have to be alone in this." Asha's resolve faltered, and the weapon wavered in her hand. You don't understand the risks. If I let go now, everything will collapse." "No, it won't," Dr. Patel urged, his voice filled with conviction. "We can work together to expose the truth. We can reach people who need to hear your story." The two men beside Asha exchanged glances, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. Alara took another step closer, her heart pounding. "Let's end this before it escalates," she said gently. "This isn't who you are. You're more than this moment. You have the power to change lives without destruction." Just then, a loud bang echoed through the warehouse, followed by the unmistakable sound of police breaking down doors. Officers flooded into the room, shouting orders, weapons drawn, eyes scanning for threats. "Get down," Chief McGregor shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos as he pushed through the fray. Asha's accomplices hesitated, glancing at each other, and in that moment of distraction, Alara seized the opportunity. "Asha, now is your chance. We can escape together." Asha's eyes darted between her accomplices and Alara. The weight of the moment bore down on her, and Alara could see the inner struggle playing out. "Asha, please," Alara implored, desperation creeping into her voice. "Make the right choice." Before Asha could respond, one of her accomplices suddenly lunged toward the officers, a weapon raised. The situation spiraled into chaos as shouts echoed around them, and Alara's heart sank. "No!" Alara screamed, her voice rising above the turmoil. In an instant, gunfire erupted, a cacophony of chaos as officers returned fire, the sound ricocheting off the walls. Alara ducked instinctively, pulling Riven and Dr. Patel down beside her as the scene erupted into pandemonium. "Get out!" Chief McGregor shouted, his voice cutting through the noise. "We need to secure the area." Alara's heart raced as she crouched low, her mind racing. Asha was caught in the crossfire, her weapon still raised, torn between her accomplices and the officers. She was a storm trapped in a moment of indecision. "Run, Asha!" Alara shouted, her voice breaking through the chaos. "You don't have to do this. You can still escape." In that split second, Asha's gaze met Alara's, and time slowed. The chaos around them faded as they locked eyes, a connection forged in shared struggle. "Now," Alara urged, her heart pounding with urgency. "Take the chance." Asha hesitated, her breath quickening. With a sudden motion, she tossed the weapon aside, a look of determination replacing the fear. "I'm done running," she shouted, her voice rising above the chaos. "I'm done hiding." With that, she turned and dashed toward the exit, her accomplices hesitating in shock. "Stop her!" one of them shouted, but Asha was already moving. Alara surged forward, instinctively following Asha. "We can make it! Come on!" They barreled through the chaos, officers shouting behind them, the sound of gunfire echoing in the distance. Elara felt a rush of adrenaline as they burst through the side exit and into the cool night air. "Keep moving," Asha shouted, her eyes wild with determination. "We can't let them catch us." They raced across the open ground, the sound of pursuit echoing behind them. Elara's heart raced, fear and exhilaration coursing through her veins. "Where do we go?" Riven shouted, glancing back as they sprinted. "Over there," Elara pointed to a cluster of trees lining the perimeter of the warehouse, a dark shelter amidst the chaos. "We can hide there." They veered toward the trees, the shadows enveloping them as they ducked behind the thick trunks. Elara's breath came in ragged gasps, adrenaline surging through her. They had escaped, but for how long? Asha leaned against a tree, her breath heaving, her expression a mix of fear and resolve. "What now?" she asked, her voice shaky. "We need to regroup," Elara said, glancing at the others. "There's still a chance to turn this around. You have to trust us." Asha's eyes narrowed. "And how do I know you won't betray me? How do I know I can trust anyone?" "Because we're all in this together," Dr. Patel replied firmly. "You can't do this alone anymore. There's a better way to fight." The weight of Asha's past bore down on her, but for the first time, Elara saw a flicker of hope in her eyes. "I don't know if I can trust anyone," Asha admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "You can trust us to help you make things right," Elara said, stepping closer. "But we have to act fast. We need to stop whatever is happening before it's too late." Asha looked between them, the conflict still evident in her gaze. "And what if I fail? What if I'm not strong enough?" "You are strong enough," Elara said firmly. "You've already taken the first step. You're here, and you're still standing. We can face this together." The distant sounds of police sirens grew louder, the urgency of the moment pressing down on them. Asha nodded slowly, her expression hardening with determination. "All right," she said, her voice steadying. "Let's do this." As they made their way deeper into the trees, Elara felt a surge of hope. They were about to face an uphill battle, but they were ready to confront the darkness head-on. Together, they would turn this fight into a cause for change. "Let's head toward the outskirts of the town," Riven suggested, glancing over his shoulder. "We need to find a place to regroup and come up with a plan." "Agreed," Dr. Patel said, his voice resolute. "We need to figure out how to expose what Asha has done and stop the virus from being released." As they moved through the trees, Elara felt a sense. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a silver glow over the dense thicket of trees that surrounded them. Elara, Asha, Riven, and Dr. Patel moved cautiously, the sounds of chaos fading behind them, but the weight of their predicament lingered heavy in the air. Elara glanced at Asha, who walked with a determined stride, her face a mixture of fear and resolve. They needed to find safety and formulate a plan, but Elara could sense the turmoil still brewing within Asha. "Where are we headed?" Asha asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just a bit further," Riven replied, glancing back to ensure they hadn't been followed. "There's an old cabin not too far from here. It should be off the grid, and we can lay low for a while." "Good," Asha said, her tone clipped. "We need to figure out our next move." The group continued deeper into the woods, the shadows enveloping them like a cloak. Elara could feel the weight of their shared secrets hanging between them, the history that had brought them to this point. As they reached the cabin, a sense of relief washed over Elara. The structure was old and weathered, hidden from prying eyes, nestled among the trees. Riven pushed the door open, revealing a dark interior, the air thick with dust and the scent of damp wood. "Here we are," Riven said, stepping inside cautiously. "Let's hope it's still standing." Elara followed, her heart racing as she took in the dimly lit space. It was a small cabin, with a single room that held a rickety table and a few scattered chairs. A small fireplace sat in the corner, the remnants of ash still lingering. "We'll need to make it a bit more secure," Dr. Patel said, closing the door behind them. "Let's check for any exits." As they moved through the cabin, Elara couldn't shake the feeling that they were still in danger. The events of the night had shattered everything she thought she knew about Ashas, but deep down, she believed there was still a chance for redemption. "Do you have a plan?" Asha asked, her voice sharp, cutting through Alara's thoughts. Alara took a deep breath, steeling herself. "We need to expose what's happening. There's still a chance to stop the virus from being released and to bring the truth to light." "And how do you plan to do that?" Asha challenged, crossing her arms. "You think the authorities will listen to you after everything that's happened? They're likely to think we're the enemy." "They need to know the truth," Alara insisted. "We need evidence, a way to show them that this virus is more than just a tool, it's a weapon. We have to gather whatever we can." Asha's expression softened slightly, her defenses wavering. "I don't even know what I have left. The lab, everything's a mess. I've burned bridges I can't rebuild." "You still have us," Riven said, stepping closer. "We can help you find a way. We're in this together." Silence settled over them as they processed the weight of those words. Alara felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps they could find a way to salvage this situation. "All right," Asha said finally, her voice firm. "But if we're doing this, we do it my way. I know the lab inside and out. I can guide you." Dr. Patel nodded. "That's a start. We need to gather as much information as possible. But we must be careful. If Asha's former colleagues are involved, they won't hesitate to silence us." Asha's eyes darkened at the mention of her former team. "They're not going to just let this go. If they find out we're on to them, we'll be dead before we know it." "We'll have to be smart about this," Alaa said, determination surging within her. "We'll need a distraction, something to draw their attention away while we gather what we need." "Like what?" Asha asked, her brow furrowing in thought. "Maybe we could use the chaos from earlier to our advantage," Riven suggested. "If we can create a false lead, something that'll keep them occupied, we might have a chance to get into the lab unnoticed." Alara nodded, excitement building at the prospect. "That could work. We just need to think strategically." "Asha, do you have any idea how we can create a diversion?" Asha's mind raced, the wheels turning as she considered their options. "I might have a few contacts who could help. If I can reach out to them, I could create some noise that'll pull their focus away from us." "Do you think they'll listen?" Dr. Patel asked, skepticism lacing his tone. "They might if I present it right," Asha replied, her confidence beginning to return. "But it'll be risky. I'll need to make contact without them realizing I'm involved." "We'll have your back," Ilara reassured her. "Whatever happens, we're in this together." Asha nodded slowly, her resolve hardening. "Okay, let's do this." As they settled in to plan their next moves, the atmosphere in the cabin shifted from one of despair to determination. They had a chance to fight back, to confront the darkness that loomed over them, and Alara felt a renewed sense of purpose. "Let's split up for now," Riven suggested. "I'll stay here and keep an eye on things. Ilara, Asha, you two can start gathering information. Dr. Patel, you can help me fortify this place." Alara and Asha exchanged glances, a silent agreement forming between them. "All right," Alara said, taking the lead. "Asha, let's head to your old lab and see what we can find. We'll need to be quick." Asha nodded, her expression shifting from apprehension to determination. "Right, I know a back route we can take. It'll help us avoid detection." As they made their way out of the cabin, Alara felt a mix of emotions swirling inside her: fear, hope, and a determination to uncover the truth. They were stepping into the unknown, but together they were stronger. The night air was cool against her skin as they moved through the trees, the sounds of the forest enveloping them. Asha led the way, her footsteps steady, but Alara could sense the tension radiating from her. "What if they see us?" Asha asked, glancing over her shoulder. "We'll be careful," Alara reassured her. "Just stick to the plan." As they approached the outskirts of the lab, Ilara's heart raced. The towering structure loomed ahead, its windows dark and foreboding. They crept closer, moving quietly, trying to blend into the shadows. "Okay, here's the plan," Asha whispered, pointing to a side entrance. We can slip in through there. It's usually less guarded at night. Alara nodded, her heart pounding as they approached the door. They paused at the entrance, listening for any signs of movement inside. The air was tense, thick with uncertainty. "Ready?" Asha asked, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Let's do this," Alara replied, pushing the door open slowly. The creaking hinges echoed in the silence as they slipped inside, the dim light and narrow hallway. Alara felt a wave of nostalgia wash over her as she recognized the sterile environment. The lab was a place she had once admired, now tainted by the darkness that had taken root within it. "Stay close," Asha whispered, leading the way. "We need to find the main lab. That's where they'll have the most information." As they moved through the corridors, Alara felt the weight of their mission pressing down on her. They were walking into a den of secrets, and the stakes had never been higher. "Here it is," Asha said, stopping in front of a door marked with a biohazard symbol. "This is the main lab." Ilara's heart raced as she glanced at the door. "Are you sure it's safe?" "Trust me," Asha replied, her voice resolute. "I know what to expect in there." Taking a deep breath, they pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was filled with equipment, microscopes, vials, and monitors flickering with data. Ilara felt a rush of adrenaline as they entered, her eyes scanning the room for anything that could be useful. "Let's split up and look for any files or data," Asha suggested. "We need to find evidence of what they've been working on." Ilara nodded, moving toward a nearby desk. She rifled through papers, her heart pounding as she searched for anything that could help their cause. Minutes passed, the tension in the room palpable as they sifted through stacks of documents. Asha was focused, her movements precise, but Alara could see the shadows of doubt creeping back into her expression. "Anything?" Asha asked, her voice tight with anticipation. "Not yet," Alara replied, pushing aside a pile of papers. "But there has to be something here." Just then, Asha let out a sharp intake of breath. "Ilara, look at this." Ilara rushed over, her heart racing as she peered over Asha's shoulder at the screen. A series of documents were open, detailing research that sent chills down Ilara's spine. The glowing screen lit Asha's face as she scanned the documents with increasing urgency. Ilara leaned closer, her breath catching in her throat. The data detailed experimental procedures for the virus, including its development and potential applications. Each word felt like a revelation, and the implications weighed heavily on them. This is everything," Asha whispered, her fingers trembling as she navigated through the files. "They're planning to weaponize it." Alara's stomach churned at the revelation. "What do you mean? They're going to use the virus as a bioweapon?" "Yes. Look here," Asha said, pointing to a series of graphs and projections on the screen. "They're testing how it spreads, the symptoms it causes, and the potential for creating chaos in targeted populations. This isn't just research, it's a blueprint for destruction." Dr. Patel's voice crackled over their earpieces, a reminder of their team back at the cabin. "How's it going in there? Have you found anything?" "Dr. Patel, it's worse than we thought," Ilara replied, her voice tight with urgency. "Asha just uncovered documents detailing the virus's weaponization. They're planning to unleash it." "Stay focused. If you can, gather as much evidence as you can and get out of there," Dr. Patel urged. "We need to expose this before it's too late." Ilara turned back to Asha, who was scrolling through the documents with feverish intensity. "We need to copy this data. We have to get it to the authorities." Asha's face was a mask of determination. "I can't believe they'd go this far. All I wanted was to make a difference, and now," her voice trailed off, the weight of her involvement pressing down on her. "We'll make it right," Ilara said, trying to instill confidence. "But we need to act fast." Asha's fingers flew over the keyboard, initiating a download of the crucial files. Ilara kept an eye on the door, her senses heightened, acutely aware of the danger lurking outside. Time felt like an enemy, each second stretching out in anticipation. The download progress bar inched forward, a constant reminder of their urgency. Come on, Alara muttered under her breath, her heart racing. Almost there, Asha replied, her eyes glued to the screen. Just a little more time. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway, sharp and urgent. Ilara's heart leapt into her throat. We need to hurry. Asha's hands moved faster, sweat beading on her forehead. I'm almost done. Just a few more seconds. The footsteps grew closer, and Alara glanced anxiously at the door, her instincts screaming at her to get ready to defend themselves. Asha! I know, Asha snapped, her focus unwavering. Just a few more seconds. With a final click, the screen flashed, and Asha exhaled in relief. Got it. She quickly transferred the files to a USB drive, her fingers shaking with adrenaline. Let's go, Alara urged, grabbing Asha's arm and pulling her toward the door. As they moved swiftly to the exit, Asha paused, her eyes darting around the lab. Wait, we should take something more. They might have hard copies of the research. Now isn't the time, Alara insisted, but Asha was already moving toward a nearby cabinet. We can't leave without more evidence. Asha opened the cabinet, rummaging through papers and vials. There has to be something here we can use. Alara bit her lip, torn between the urgency of escaping and Asha's desperation. Fine, but make it quick. As Asha stuffed several documents into her backpack, the footsteps outside grew louder, a distinct voice barking orders. Check the lab, they have to be in there. We're out of time, Alara hissed, pulling Asha toward the door. Now. Asha grabbed the last few papers, her eyes wide with fear and determination. Let's go. They burst through the door and sprinted down the hallway, their footsteps echoing in the stark silence. Alara's heart raced as they dodged around corners, adrenaline propelling them forward. Where do we go? Asha shouted, panic creeping into her voice. Back the way we came, Alara replied, her mind racing as they retraced their steps. They could hear voices now, urgency lacing the commands from outside. Find them, they can't have gone far. The authoritative voice echoed ominously, sending a shiver down Ilara's spine. They reached the side entrance, and Asha pushed the door open, peering out into the night. It's clear, let's go. They dashed outside, the cool night air hitting them like a wave. The shadows of the trees beckoned, but as they ran, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. The lights from the lab lit the area around them. Keep moving, Alara urged, their feet pounding against the ground as they raced toward the cover of the trees. Branches whipped at their faces as they plunged into the thicket, the world around them becoming a blur of darkness and panic. This way, Asha called, leading Alara deeper into the woods. They ran for what felt like an eternity, the sound of their pursuers fading behind them. Eventually, they slowed, leaning against the rough bark of a tree to catch their breath. Did we lose them? Asha gasped, her chest heaving. I think so, Alara panted, her heart racing as she scanned the darkness around them. For now. Do you still have the USB? Asha asked urgently. Alara nodded, pulling it from her pocket and holding it up. Right here, we have the evidence we need. Now we just have to figure out how to get it to Dr. Patel and the authorities, Asha said, her expression fierce. They need to know what's happening. Alara nodded, determination coursing through her. We'll find a way. We can't let this go any further. Asha took a deep breath, the fear in her eyes slowly shifting to resolve. I won't let this destroy any more lives. I'll do whatever it takes. As they caught their breath, Alara felt a renewed sense of hope. Asha was willing to fight back, to stand up against the darkness they had uncovered. Together, they could make a difference. We need to get back to the cabin, Alara said, her mind racing with possibilities. If we can regroup with Dr. Patel and Riven, we can plan our next move. Agreed, Asha replied, her eyes scanning the area for any sign of danger. Let's stay low and move quickly. They navigated through the trees, keeping their voices low, but as they approached the edge of the woods, Alara felt a growing sense of unease. Do you think they'll be waiting for us? Asha whispered, glancing back at the path they had come from. I hope not, Ilara replied, her heart pounding. But we have to be prepared for anything. As they emerged from the trees, the cabin came into view, a flickering light lit the small structure. There it is, Ilara said, relief washing over her. But as they drew closer, a sinking feeling settled in her stomach. The front door was ajar, and the shadows inside moved with a sense of urgency. Asha, Ilara's voice trailed off, her instincts screaming at her. Something's not right, Asha said, her voice tense. They crept closer, hearts pounding as they peered through the door. Inside, chaos reigned. Riven and Dr. Patel were nowhere to be seen, but the cabin was a mess, papers scattered across the floor, furniture overturned. Ilara, we have to be careful, Asha warned, her voice low. They might have found us. Ilara nodded, her pulse quickening. We need to find out what happened. They stepped inside, the air thick with tension. The flickering light lit a scene of disarray, but no sign of their companions. Riven? Dr. Patel? Ilara called softly, her voice trembling. Silence enveloped them, a heavy blanket of dread. Ilara felt her heart sink. Where are they? Maybe they're hiding, Asha suggested, her eyes darting around the room. Let's check the back. They moved cautiously through the cabin, their senses heightened. Every creak of the floorboards echoed in the stillness, amplifying the fear coursing through them. Back here, Asha suddenly called, rushing toward a closed door at the rear of the cabin. Ilara followed, her heart pounding. Asha pushed the door open, revealing a small storage room. The light flickered as they stepped inside, and Ilara's breath caught in her throat. Riven was crouched in the corner, his hands tied behind his back, while Dr. Patel lay unconscious on the floor, a bruise forming on his forehead. Oh no, Ilara gasped, rushing forward. Riven. He looked up, his expression a mix of relief and urgency. Ilara, Asha, thank God you're here. They came in and took us by surprise. Who? Asha asked, her voice tight with fear as she knelt beside Riven, working to untie him. The sun rose gently over the horizon, casting a warm glow across the landscape. Ilara, Asha, Riven, and Dr. Patel stood outside the small cabin, the chaos of the previous days slowly fading into memory. They had managed to escape the clutches of their pursuers, but the fight was far from over. With the evidence they had gathered, the four of them had reached out to trusted contacts in the media and law enforcement. The revelations about the virus's weaponization had sent shockwaves through the scientific community and beyond. Investigations were underway, and the truth was finally coming to light. As they stood together, Ilara felt a sense of closure wash over her. They had fought against the darkness, not just for themselves, but for countless others who might have fallen victim to the malevolent plans of those at the lab. Can you believe we made it? Asha said, a hint of disbelief in her voice. Riven chuckled softly. I can believe it. We're a team, and we didn't back down when it mattered most. Dr. Patel nodded in agreement. We took on a system that seemed invincible and brought it to its knees. It's a testament to the power of truth and collaboration. Ilara turned to Asha, a newfound respect blooming between them. You were incredible back there. I don't know if we could have done this without your knowledge and bravery. Asha smiled, her eyes shining with gratitude. I owe you all so much. I've learned that redemption is possible, and it starts with taking responsibility. As they stood in the early morning light, the weight of their experiences began to lift. They had faced fear, betrayal, and uncertainty, but they emerged stronger, bonded by their shared mission. Riven glanced at his watch. We should head back to the city soon. There's still so much work to do, but we can take a moment to breathe. Ilara nodded, appreciating the serenity of the moment. Let's make this count. We can't change what happened, but we can make sure it never happens again. With renewed determination, they began to gather their belongings. As Ilara packed the USB drive containing the evidence, she felt a sense of hope for the future. The world still held challenges, but they had the power to confront them together. As they left the cabin behind, stepping into the sunlight, Alara took one last look at the place that had become a symbol of their struggle. It had been a refuge and a battleground, but now it represented a new beginning. "Let's make sure our voices are heard," Asha said, walking alongside Alara. "We need to advocate for those who can't speak for themselves." Alara smiled, the weight of their journey transforming into a promise. "And we will, together." The group made their way through the trees, feeling the warmth of the sun on their backs. Each step was a reminder of their resilience, of the bonds they had forged in the face of adversity. As they reached the edge of the woods, the city skyline loomed ahead, a vibrant reminder of the world waiting for them. They were ready to face whatever came next, armed with the truth and the strength of their unity. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, it felt filled with possibility, and as they stepped forward into the light, they knew they were not just survivors, they were agents of change. The end.